Firing squad prepared. If I could have the well cleared, we're going to begin the hearings at this point.
Chairman, I think it's appropriate to note that the hearing is starting on time.
I appreciate the Vice Chairman noting that as in keeping with our tradition of punctuality in this committee. The hearing will come to order. We open the hearing this morning on the nomination of Robert M. Gates to be Director of Central Intelligence. Mr. Gates' nomination was sent to the Senate on June 24th, 1991, and referred to this committee on the same day. We had planned, of course, to hold these hearings before the August recess. In the face of unexpected developments, which would have made it impossible for us to obtain all of the information required to finish our work before the recess, and with the concurrence of the administration and the nominee, we decided to delay them until now. If confirmed, Mr. Gates would be the 15th person to serve as Director of Central Intelligence, a position created by the National Security Act of 1947, to serve both as head of the Central Intelligence Agency and as coordinator of all U.S. intelligence activities. In the early days, the position was filled by military officers, some of whom were on active duty and rotated back to the military to complete their careers. The director in those days had to struggle against entrenched recalcitrant bureaucracies in order to do what the president wanted, which was to pull together all of the intelligence available to the government and provide an objective analysis, independent of particular political agendas. That remains the basic task today. But the Director of Central Intelligence now commands vast capabilities to collect and analyze information that his predecessors could not have even imagined. These capabilities give the Director a unique role to play in the business of government, On the basis of the information he provides, policy decisions are made, diplomatic initiatives are mounted, military operations are planned and carried out, and research and development efforts are targeted. To some degree, the wisdom of government policy decisions rests upon the quality of the director's efforts. The director's job is almost unique in terms of the range of sensitive activities the CIA is asked to carry out, again, largely in secret. Covert actions, for example, are undertaken abroad in support of U.S. policy, but without official acknowledgement by the United States government. And while the oversight committees attempt to do a thorough job of monitoring these activities, in the end, it is often the director's judgment that determines whether they remain consistent with U.S. policy and American values. The director must also understand, respect, and work cooperatively with the intelligence oversight committees of the Congress. This committee has worked hard to reform the oversight process over the past 5 years. We are proud of what has been accomplished. A new independent audit unit has been created in the committee staff to provide us with the capability to examine even the most sensitive programs of the agency. A statutory inspector general has been established for the CIA. Regular and systematic quarterly reviews of all covert actions are undertaken by the committee, and its staff tracks these programs on a much more frequent basis. To ensure that the committee meets its own responsibilities, it has also adopted strict rules and procedures for its members and staff to prevent any leaks or compromise of sensitive classified information. It is important that the director understand the oversight process as a fundamental protection for the American people who have a right to have their elected representatives pass upon even the most secret programs which they're financing as taxpayers. At no time in our history has this appointment been more important. The next director of Central Intelligence will perhaps have more to do with shaping the future of intelligence than any other director who has come before him or will come after him. The new director will face a challenge and an opportunity of immense proportion. Perhaps the greatest threat to our national security is the danger that we will not change our thinking to coincide with all of the changes in the world around us. World leadership in the next century will depend upon a whole different set of assets than were required for leadership in the last half of this century during the era of the Cold War between the nuclear superpowers. Military strength, while still needed, will be relatively less important in determining leadership and influence in the world. And economic and social strength will be far more crucial for our country. As our friends and allies become less fearful of the Soviet military threat, they will also become less willing to follow America's lead automatically. To be politically influential, we must be economically strong and also build a society at home that will stand as a worthy model for others to follow. All of this means that policymakers will need intelligence with a new focus. Clearly, the intelligence community is likely to be more streamlined. Hopefully, it can be less expensive as well. With about half of our intelligence assets, especially those in the area of expensive technologies, targeted in the past on the Soviet military threat, substantial budget savings, more than enough to meet the new priorities and fund new missions, should be achieved. These hearings will give us the opportunity not only to examine the past actions of this nominee and to probe his qualifications for this position, but also they give us an opportunity to begin a valuable public debate about the future of American intelligence. For well over a year, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence has been conducting a study of the basic purposes and the future of the intelligence community through hearings, personal interviews with a wide cross-section of present and former top government officials, intelligence experts, and historians. Our findings have led us already to push the community to make budgetary shifts to reflect major changes in the goals of intelligence collection and analysis. I have no quarrel with those who want to overhaul our current intelligence system. An intelligence organization designed to meet the challenges of the Cold War era clearly can no longer do the job and would not be worth what we've been paying for it in the past. Some have focused on rearranging the bureaucratic structure of the intelligence community, while others have gone so far as to urge the disbanding of the CIA. Our real task, however, is to redefine the very mission of intelligence in the new world which we face. Issues and challenges may change, but policymakers will always need to make informed decisions based upon timely and accurate intelligence. That is why we will always need an institution devoted to the collection and analysis of intelligence. While the military has a role in the intelligence community, it would be a mistake to place our entire intelligence community or operation in the Department of Defense at a time when competition for world leadership is being increasingly defined in economic and social terms. Nor can the State Department be expected to totally meet the intelligence needs of our government. It is not equipped to provide the kinds of intelligence needed by our military services. Furthermore, the collection of raw intelligence is not always consistent with the process of diplomacy. For intelligence to be as objective as possible, the producers of intelligence should not be subordinate to any consumer agency, whether the State or Defense Department. With these considerations in mind, the broad outlines of the new intelligence community are already taking shape. For one thing, it is clear that there must be more emphasis on human intelligence. With fewer forward positions around the world, we must have more and better information about the intentions of potential adversaries and earlier warnings of hostile acts. The greatest intelligence failure of the recent Persian Gulf crisis was our inability to move quickly, more quickly, to detect the threat that Saddam Hussein posed to his neighbors. With better human intelligence about Saddam's intentions, even 6 months before the invasion, the President could have considered pursuing various options, like joint exercises with Saudi Arabia or a beefed-up air presence in the region. These actions might have deterred Iraq's aggression and enabled us to avoid a war altogether. Not only must we have better human intelligence, it must be focused differently. Too much of our intelligence gathering and analysis is still targeted on the Soviet Union. The failed coup attempt confirms, even to the most skeptical, that the Cold War is over. And while we should not ignore Eastern Europe and the USSR, we clearly must improve our capabilities in the Third World and in regions like the Middle East, where our coverage is thin. Terrorism and international narcotics trafficking also merit more attention. Economic intelligence is another area that demands both more resources and clearer policy guidance. The aggressive acts of espionage pursued by foreign governments, at times in collaboration with their intelligence services, to steal private American commercial secrets to serve their own national economic interests, are a clear indication of this threat. How to deter these activities and set appropriate limits of American countermeasures remains to be defined. The line between civilian and military threats to our national security becomes blurred. This is a matter that we've been discussing jointly between our committee and the Armed Services Committee, chaired by my colleague to my right, Senator Nunn. We can no longer afford to support two separate empires that do not talk to each other. Last year in the Intelligence Authorization Bill, the Senate Intelligence Committee warned that, and I quote, tactical and national intelligence communities appear to be excessively isolated from one another. Military commanders seek self-sufficiency, while the civilian community pays scant attention to the commander's needs. Simply reforming human intelligence priorities is not enough. If we're really to improve human intelligence, we must invest more in education, especially in the areas of international, cultural, and foreign language studies. Just as we did after Sputnik with the passage of the National Defense Education Act, it's time to invest some of our military and intelligence budget dollars in grants to students and colleges in key areas of study vital to our national security, as is being redefined in the new world environment. Our committee has proposed a National Security Education Act will be considered on the floor of the Senate to allow more college undergraduates to study in foreign countries, to give grants to colleges and universities to improve their courses of study in foreign languages, international studies, and area studies like Middle Eastern or Latin American studies, and to provide more graduate fellowships in these fields. Finally, we must examine the process by which intelligence analysis is developed for policymakers from the President on down. Current analysis is often too bureaucratic and cautious. General Schwarzkopf rightly said that intelligence is often, and I quote him, caveated, footnoted, and watered down to the point of being irrelevant. Less value should be placed on reaching a bureaucratic consensus and more value on crisp, clear predictions with room for forceful expression of dissenting views and the reasoning behind competing viewpoints. The next Director of Central Intelligence will preside over the first sweeping redesign of American intelligence since the National Security Act was passed 44 years ago. As Abraham Lincoln once said, we must think anew and act anew, and it is critical that our top intelligence officials have the vision and the determination to do exactly that. To meet these challenges, the President has nominated Robert M. Gates to be the next Director of Central Intelligence. Mr. Gates is well known to the members of this committee. He is a professional in the intelligence field with almost 25 years in government service, much of it in senior positions at the CIA and at the White House. Native of Kansas and an honors graduate of William & Mary University with a master's degree from Indiana University and a PhD from Georgetown, Mr. Gates began his career as a junior analyst at the CIA. A Soviet analyst by profession, he has served as a CIA representative to the SALT II talks from 1971 to 1973, and later served on the National Security Council staff in the late 1970s under Dr. Brzezinski in the administration of President Carter. In 1980, he returned to the CIA, and in 1982 was designated Director of Intelligence, responsible for all CIA analysis and production. In April of 1986, he was nominated to be the Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency and was confirmed by the Senate for that position. When Mr. Casey became seriously ill in December of 1986, Mr. Gates was appointed Acting Director, where he served until April of 1987, when Judge Webster, of course, became Director at that time. After serving again as Deputy Director under Judge Webster, we had a lot of experience working with Mr. Gates during that period of time as he served as Judge Webster's deputy. Mr. Gates again returned to the White House in January of 1989 to serve as Deputy Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, the position which he currently holds. We welcome him to the committee today. The committee has respect for this nominee's professional ability and intellectual capabilities. We appreciate the cooperative spirit with which he has worked with this committee, both as Acting Director and as Deputy to Judge Webster, and again as Deputy National Security Advisor to the President. I would say, and I think my colleagues would agree with me, that our experience with this nominee during the time both that he served as Acting Director and Deputy to Judge Webster is that he strongly supported the oversight process. He advised constantly the Director to be as open as possible with this committee, and wherever possible, if there was a question, to err on the side of providing too much rather than too little information to this committee. And we appreciate that record of cooperation that we have with this nominee. At the same time, our first responsibility is to the American people. Since so many of the activities of this sensitive position are conducted in secret, we, acting as trustees for the people, must assure ourselves, to the best of our abilities, that the record of this nominee reflects those personal qualities that would qualify him to serve as Director. Our task is complicated by the fact that the investigation of the Iran-Contra affair by the Independent Counsel is still ongoing. In recent weeks, with the pleas entered by Mr. Alan D. Fires, Jr., the former Director of the Central American Task Force at the CIA, and the indictment of Mr. Clair George, the former Deputy Director for Operations, new questions have been raised which require careful scrutiny. The committee is handicapped in its efforts because grand jury rules prohibit a sharing of information about testimony before the grand jury with our committee by the Independent Counsel. Since the law provides that the investigation of the Independent Counsel could continue for months and indeed even for years to come, Since there's a possibility of legal action based upon grand jury testimony, it could be as long as 5 years of additional process under the law from now. It would not be possible for this committee to further delay its work and still give the President's nomination the fair consideration which it deserves. The committee has therefore endeavored to develop its own base of information relating to these events so that we can reach our own conclusions based upon the best evidence available to us. When these hearings have come to a conclusion, it is my hope that the American people will be able to use 3 words to describe our efforts: thorough, fair, and nonpartisan. We have sought to be as thorough as possible. We have reviewed the entire record of the Iran-Contra affair. We propounded a series of written questions to the nominee designed to fill in factual gaps in that record when possible. The nominee answered these questions in a sworn statement, and we're making these public today along with other documents. The committee requested and obtained the help of the FBI and the Inspector General of the CIA in further expanding its background checks of the nominee and in attempting to evaluate the factual basis of any and all allegations that have been raised privately or in the media about the activities of the nominee. The committee also found it necessary in some cases to obtain sworn statements from other Iran-Contra witnesses with respect to their previous testimonies relating to the nominee to clarify and supplement the record. These will be made public later this week. In view of the information contained in the Fires plea bargain agreement made public in July, we also found it necessary to request additional documentation from the CIA and to examine additional CIA witnesses in an attempt to ascertain what, if anything, the nominee might have known with respect to the disclosures made by Mr. Fires. Most have agreed to talk with us without immunity from prosecution. However, attorneys for several key officials, including Mr. George and Mr. Fires himself, would not permit their clients to provide testimony without immunity. The committee did, in fact, obtain an immunity order for Mr. Fires, and will have him testify before us later this week. We have not voted immunity for any other witness out of deference to the concerns of the independent counsel. We're still endeavoring to see if we can work out a way to receive the voluntary testimony of others that might be impacted by this decision. We have also heard voluntary testimony from the past chief of the Latin American Division of the CIA, and a declassified transcript of his testimony will be made public prior to the conclusion of these hearings. While these hearings will be conducted in public to the maximum degree possible, there are some areas which require closed deliberation by our members because of the classified information involved. This includes materials related to the preparation of intelligence, analysis, and estimates which remain classified and highly sensitive. Our policy will be to release all information to the public related to the objectivity of intelligence analysis that can be released without compromising vital national security interests. In addition to being thorough, we are determined to be fair. This nominee will be given an opportunity, after we have heard other witnesses, to appear before us again if he should desire to do so. In preparing for these hearings, the staff designees appointed by each of the 15 members of this committee, Democratic and Republican, representing all points of view, have participated in decisions regarding the calling of witnesses, obtaining of documents, and the propounding of questions. Any information requested by any member of this committee has been sought from the appropriate agency. It is my view that it is my own responsibility, personal responsibility, and my responsibility as chairman to reach no final conclusions about this nomination until I have heard all of the evidence and testimony. I believe that other members of the committee approach the task before us with a similar determination to be both thorough and fair. Finally, these proceedings will be used solely as a forum to judge the qualifications of this nominee and not for any broader political purpose. This nominee, after 25 years of professional service, is entitled to consideration on his own merits. I am proud of the fact that during the almost 5 years that I've been privileged to serve as chairman of this committee, along with 2 distinguished vice chairmen from the other party, Senator Frank Murkowski here today, the current vice chairman of our committee, and the former vice chairman, Senator Bill Cohen, that we have never had a single vote strictly along party lines in this committee. We have sought to put aside party considerations and to render the best possible judgments we could make for our country. We intend to do just that in the hearings that begin today. With this background, let me briefly outline the committee's plan for the hearings. It is anticipated that the initial questioning of the nominee will take place today and tomorrow, following the opening statements of members and introductory statements of the nominee. There will be no hearings on Wednesday, which is Yom Kippur. On Thursday, the hearing will be devoted to outside witnesses focused principally upon Iran-Contra issues. We will hear Alan D. Fires, Jr., former Deputy DCI John McMahon, Charles Allen, a senior CIA official, Acting Director of Central Intelligence Richard Kerr, former Deputy Director Admiral Bobby Inman, and from former CI Officer Tom Polgar. If we complete the testimony of these witnesses, on Friday we will have the closed session I referred to earlier on the objectivity of intelligence estimates. There will need to be additional consideration, I might say also in closed session, of classified intelligence sharing activities with certain other countries. It's impossible to set an exact timetable. The hearings could go into next week, in which case they will resume on Tuesday, the 24th. They will be expeditious, but they will last as long as they need to last for the committee to do its job properly. If there's no objection, I ask that the following documents be placed into the record of these hearings. First, the nominee's answers to the committee's standard questionnaire. Second, the nominee's answers to our supplementary questions pertaining to Iran-Contra issues. Third, a letter dated July 1st, 1991 from Stephen D. Potts, Director of the Office of Government Ethics, transmitting the financial disclosure form of the nominee. Fourth, the declassified transcript of Director Casey's testimony before the committee on November 21st, 1986. Fifth, the declassified transcript of Mr. Gates' appearance before the Tower Board on January 12th, 1987. And finally, the declassified transcript of Mr. Gates' appearance before the House Select Committee on Intelligence on December 10th, 1986. Without objection, these will all be entered into the record. It's now my privilege to turn for opening comments to the Vice Chairman of this committee. As I've indicated, it is a committee that has operated in a uniquely bipartisan way in keeping with our trusteeship responsibilities in this sensitive national intelligence area. It's been my privilege to work with him. I could not have a more effective working partner and one that takes his responsibilities more seriously. So I turn now for his opening comments to my colleague, the Vice Chairman, Senator Murkowski of Alaska.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and colleagues, no government appointment is of greater sensitivity or importance for the national security than that of the Director of the Central Intelligence. Because of recent international events, the nomination before us takes on, I think, a particular significance. And in my 10 years in the Senate, I have never seen a time in U.S. foreign relations that present greater opportunities, or, if we fail to take advantage of these opportunities, greater long-term difficulties. Some years ago, former Secretary of State Dean Acheson wrote a book entitled Present at the Creation, describing the formation of U.S. foreign policy at the outset of the Cold War. Well, the Cold War is over, and we are present at the creation of the post-Cold War era. These truly are extraordinary times. Just within the last year, we have seen Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait and a victorious and powerful U.S. military response, and the final collapse of the Soviet Communist Empire within Russia itself. This August, a coup led by supporters of faded and outmoded ideology failed, leaving in its wake an outlawed Communist Party. This event was the final trigger releasing the forces of reform. Now we find a stunning situation in what used to be called the Soviet Union, where republics are now declaring their independence and either leaving the Union or attempting to reformulate a confederation, leaving in some disarray the control of Soviet weaponry. These staggering events will have profound impacts on the future of U.S. intelligence. We have been fortunate to have President Bush, Secretary Baker, Secretary Cheney, General Scowcroft in positions of leadership during these incredible times. However, the President's team is not complete. He needs at his side his choice as Director of Central Intelligence. The President sent his nominee to the Senate in June, and we had hoped to hold our confirmation hearing prior to the August recess. Yet, as a consequence of waiting until now, we will be able to hear from more key witnesses, including persons who have been involved with the independent counsel. Mr. Chairman, the nominee before us, Robert M. Gates, enjoys President Bush's unconditional support. I've personally met with the President as recently as last week, and he reaffirmed his commitment to this nomination in no uncertain terms. Having come to know Bob Gates for several years now, I can understand why the President has selected him. From the time of his graduation from the College of William and Mary, he has dedicated his career to intelligence and national security issues, either at the National Security Council or at the Central Intelligence Agency. His original expertise is in Soviet analysis, a vital skill at a time when the Soviet Union, with thousands of nuclear weapons, is undergoing a convulsive and unpredictable transformation. Perhaps more importantly, Dr. Gates has accumulated broad experiences, the breadth and depth of national security and foreign policy issues. He is a trained analyst, the first director with this background. All this makes Bob Gates uniquely qualified to lead the intelligence community at a time when the most basic assumptions about this world must be re-examined and the entire role of intelligence must be redefined. This committee has a serious obligation to the United States Senate to ensure that we develop a complete record on the fitness of Dr. Gates to assume this critical post. Chairman Bourne and I and all the members of this committee take this obligation very seriously. We have directed our staffs to look into each and every matter of concern that has been expressed about this nomination. When our resources were limited and when it was appropriate, we have asked the FBI to investigate specific allegations. Now, the Chairman has already outlined the areas of inquiry that we will pursue in this nomination and the confirmation process, and I need not repeat what has already been said. I will say that my review of the committee's work and that of the FBI has convinced me up to this point that allegations against this nominee have little or no merit. The Intelligence Committee, as the Chairman has indicated, is by tradition nonpartisan, and as much as we are limited to 8 years of our Senate careers, unlike other committees. Our deliberative process, when necessary, has been somewhat frustrating, however. We have been confronted with serious concerns raised about the nomination, but we have also been exposed to frivolous or far-fetched allegations from persons of questionable background who apparently see nothing wrong in creating wild aspersions in an effort to generate headlines or protect themselves from prosecution. While I can express irritation at this process, I know that the nominee and his family has even more frustration in having to silently endure 4 months of an endless stream of allegations. I know Mr. Gates looks forward to being able to respond now and to set the record straight. This nomination has rekindled old issues surrounding the Iran-Contra affair and questions about when Dr. Gates knew about the diversion of funds to the Contras. Some wonder how Bob Gates could have known all along, since his immediate boss, Director Bill Casey, may have known about the diversion. Well, I expect to explore the management style of Bill Casey in these hearings, for it has a bearing on whether Dr. Gates should have been made aware of certain events. From my review thus far, it is clear to me that Bill Casey reached out to and personally directed the actions of CIA personnel, no matter where they appeared on the organizational chart. From what we've heard in our interviews, it was widely known that Casey cared very little for the layers of administrative bureaucracy. It is no surprise to me that certain employees, such as Alan Fires, may have reported directly to Bill Casey without going through their supervisors. In fact, Bill Casey was known to be no slave to any organizational chart, and he kept certain things to a very few persons, perhaps in an effort to eventually insulate the agency from criticism and perhaps to accept personally the risk. Further, it appears Casey followed these procedures on numerous CIA assignments. I look forward to hearing from Dr. Gates about his relationship with Mr. Casey. Some may wonder why Dr. Gates has been the subject of so much interest. The answer partially lies in the fact that he has a spectacular, successful career. Bob has a sharp and directed intellect and has risen quickly to positions of responsibility both at the National Security Council and in the Central Intelligence Agency. After having been a principal assistant to Director Bill Casey, Bob Gates was tapped for the important position of Director of the Director of Intelligence, the side of the central agency that produces analysis for policymakers. His capabilities were further recognized in April of 1986 when he became the Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency at the young age of 43. As head of the intelligence community's analytical arm, he made it clear that he intended to make intelligence analysis more timely and more useful for the President and for senior policymakers. Under him, the analytical output of the CIA grew dramatically. Dr. Gates is not a person who likes the status quo. By all accounts, he demands accountability from subordinates. There are some who react well to his strong management style, but there are others who resist and resent it. In the context of our work on this nomination, there are even some who say that Dr. Gates intentionally slanted intelligence to make it agree with the preconceived views of policymakers. Dr. Gates will have an opportunity to tell us how he ran the analysis side of the CIA and whether his firmly held views on a number of subjects influenced analysis under his leadership. Since 1988, Dr. Gates has worked directly for President Bush on the National Security Council and has gained the President's complete confidence in the process. It is not trivial to say that one important attribute of an effective leader of the intelligence community is that person's ability to gain the respect and the attention of the President. Clearly, Dr. Gates enjoys such a close relationship with President Bush. It is also not trivial to note that Dr. Gates has been a frequent and effective witness before this committee. The ability to master complex intelligence programs and issues and articulate them to the Congress is a rare and valued skill. Bob Gates will face enormous challenges, not merely in providing guidance to the President, but in managing the intelligence community. I believe that he is the right person at the right time in our history to become Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He is of a generation that understands the uses and limits of advanced technology while retaining a firm grasp of the need for human intelligence resources as well. He fully understands the full complexity of the intelligence community as it exists today, and I'm sure through these hearings will enlighten us as to how he could propose changing certain aspects of the community to make it more responsive to the nation's needs. He has been at the vortex of the highest level of foreign policy decision-making for the past several years. We on this committee will do our job thoroughly, as the chairman has said, and we will, of necessity, review the past. There are some who may suggest that we should delay this nomination until all aspects of the past, including work now underway by the independent counsel, is completed. Well, I believe that we must move ahead now. We cannot predict when the independent counsel's work will be done. It's gone on now for nearly 4 years already, and there is no clear end in sight, and with as much as 5 years under the statute of limitations to run on any new evidence garnered. We will have testimony from some key witnesses, but we will not be able to penetrate the secrecy of the grand jury, yet we will hear sworn testimony from the nominee, and we have developed our own exhaustive record on any number of issues. It is time to take action on this nomination. The President needs his team in place at this critical time. We have a duty to act, not a duty to delay. I am confident the President has submitted a highly qualified person to be the next Director of the Central Intelligence, and I know that Dr. Gates looks forward to this opportunity to finally meet with us at this confirmation hearing. Mr. Gates, we welcome you to the committee.
Thank you very much, Senator Murkowski. I now turn for his opening statement to Senator Nunn.
Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time and with the hope of establishing some precedent, I would ask that my exciting, witty, and brilliant statement be admitted to the record.
Without objection, that will be accepted, and you may set dangerous precedents indeed if you move us along that quickly. Senator Chafee.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to say to you, Mr. Gates, that it's a tribute to you that President Bush, who of course is a former director of Central Intelligence, has nominated you for this job. I think it's also a tribute to President Bush that he put substance above politics in submitting your name to the Senate. I think it would have been easy for the President to have said, well, I know that Bob Gates, in my judgment, is the best man for the job, and I know he wasn't guilty of any wrongdoing in the Iran-Contra affair, but his nomination is going to raise this issue once again. So why go through that struggle? But the President didn't take that route, and I commend him for it, and I think he's right. I think there are others whom he could have nominated if his only objective were to avoid polemics. So I share the President's view that in a period of profound political change, declining budgets, and changing missions, the intelligence community requires a leader who's intimately familiar with the mechanics of the institutions involved, someone who knows how the different parts of the U.S. intelligence community are connected and how much stress they can bear, each of them, because the overhaul of the system is clearly going to come about as we work with reduced expenditures in the years ahead. I think we all agree that the intelligence community is an arcane system of arcane systems. It's got a Rube Goldberg wiring diagram connecting everything from moles that have gone underground to satellites in space. And I'm not sure how many members of the committee could explain the difference between ELINT and IMINT and COMINT and SIGINT and MASSINT, or the relative merits of multispectral versus single-band imagery. The DCI has to have a grasp of these and 1,000 other details in order to effectively manage the intelligence community. And I think it's important to remember we're talking the intelligence community here. Sometimes people think you're just being nominated to head the CIA. It's far more than that. As a former Air Force intelligence officer, a CIA analyst, Deputy Director for Intelligence, Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, Deputy National Security Advisor, you've acquired over many years the depth and range of experience necessary effectively to lead the intelligence community during this period of change. I think it bears repetition, however, that integrity is as important as expertise in examining your fitness for this very sensitive position. And the committee clearly has an important obligation to ensure that you will faithfully uphold the law. After reviewing the record and your responses to the battery of questions submitted to you by this committee, I have yet to see any evidence of wrongdoing in your part. It appears that you promptly notified your superiors when you received information, even though it was speculative, indicating that funds may have been illegally diverted to the Contras. You have stated that in hindsight you wish you'd done even more, and that's a laudable sentiment. And I assume that if such a situation ever arose again, you would do more. However, it's also fair to say that there are some legitimate and still unresolved areas of concern regarding your actions during the Iran-Contra affair, and hours will be spent grilling you on those. It's my strong hope that your responses to our questions on those issues will resolve any lingering doubts that members of the Senate or the public may have regarding your past conduct and your qualifications for this extremely important position. You clearly enjoy the trust of the President and confidence of the President, and that is a very, very important asset. You have, by all accounts, performed with remarkable diligence and competence during a series of crises during your tenure at the NSA in the security, including the war with Iraq and the invasion of Panama. But just as important is the future, and I hope we can spend some time in these in these hearings on the future. What are your visions for the CIA and the overall intelligence community? The principal threat that's dominated our intelligence services for the last 46 years has been greatly reduced, and clearly everybody knows that. Therefore, can our intelligence budgets be substantially cut? And where should these cuts be made? Must we switch our intelligence gathering techniques dramatically? Are satellites far less useful, as has been suggested here, and human collection far more important than formerly? There's a good deal of talk of industrial espionage. Should our U.S. government intelligence agencies be commissioned to ascertain, for example, whether a foreign industrial competitor of the U.S. has developed a more powerful computer chip, one that represents a significant leap forward? Or should U.S. intelligence agencies be involved in industrial counterespionage, ascertaining whether other nations or companies from other nations are attempting to steal U.S. companies' proprietary information? Should the CIA be the organization that would alert us that, for example, China is expected to have a massive drop in grain production, and we in the U.S. have possibly lucrative sales if we increase our own production? Now, is this a duty of the CIA, for example? In brief, Mr. Gates, I don't believe these hearings should focus exclusively on what you did or didn't do in 1985 and 1986. I want to hear your views on the future of U.S. intelligence, and this means all its units. You're being nominated for Director of Central Intelligence, which encompasses far more than just being head of the CIA. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Chafee. I want to turn now to Senator Warner of Virginia for his opening statement. Senator Warner, of course, serves as the ranking minority member of the Senate Armed Services Committee as well. I've talked about the relationship of the work between our committee and that committee, and he has certainly served us well in an important liaison capacity, making sure that the work of the two committees was cooperative and consistent. Senator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, Mr. Chairman, perhaps you want to alternate, and I could follow Senator Hollings and thereby keep your order. I always want to follow Senator Chafee since I was his deputy and will be for the rest of my life. So
I think Senator Hollings is willing for you to go ahead and proceed.
Fine. Well, I'm going to pick a note from Senator Nunn and file my statement, but I do wish to say a few things to my good friend, and I say that with great respect because we've worked together for a decade. And furthermore, the CIA is based, the home office, in my state, Virginia, and I'll have the privilege later of joining other colleagues in introducing Robert Gates. But, Mr. Chairman, you noted that the world is looking at this hearing. Unlike the advise and consent procedure for Judge Thomas, which is primarily of interest within the domestic borders, this hearing projects beyond our borders. The decision that the next Director of Central Intelligence will make, the advice that he will give the President and his cabinet, impacts every foreign capital in the world. Furthermore, the degree to which you can establish trust and confidence with your counterparts among our friends and allies is the degree to which our intelligence can be improved. And this is why it's so important that our President has chosen you, Bob Gates, a man of 25 years' experience, because he recognizes, and I think this committee will eventually recognize, that you are the man best qualified to reach out beyond the borders of this country and form those bonds with your counterparts in those other countries and thereby improve our own intelligence. This is not an adversarial proceeding, as you said, Mr. Chairman, to those from abroad who watch. It is not a trial. It is not a political exercise. It is a function that we perform under Article 2, which incidentally is the article of the Constitution which deals with the powers of the President. He's given the primary authority to pick and choose those advisors whom he feels can best advise him in the Cabinet. And our judgment as a Senate, while equally important, is to determine only if he's erred in that judgment. And in my judgment, he has not. And I also, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, point out that If confirmed, Bob Gates will become a member of a team, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And that chain can be no stronger than its weakest link. And each of these individuals have put their reputations on the line, in a sense, when they joined the President in recommending to the Senate that you be the next Director of Central Intelligence. So I view this nomination as the end product of a team effort, a team that we here in the Congress have great respect, and a team that has earned the respect and confidence throughout the world. Mr. Chairman, we still face an uncertain and a dangerous world. The proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. That is, to this senator, one of the most serious things that will be addressed by the next director. And you have had a good deal of experience, and you've spoken out very forcefully on this subject. We have before the Congress now vital decisions as to how we reorder the priorities of our defense budget, and particularly whether or not we're going to move forward in this country with devising the technical means to defend ourselves against an accidental launch or an unintentional launch of a single or maybe more nuclear weapons towards us. And you have a knowledge in this area, and you have spoken out and supported the fact that this country should move forward. Certainly, if there's anything we learned from the coup in the Soviet Union, it was that we cannot just simply rely on the fact that no matter what happens in the Soviet Union, there are going to be men of strong mind that are going to make the decisions. Wrong. There were times during this coup when the codes relating to the nuclear systems fell into the hands of individuals, many of whom were highly intoxicated in those few hours and days in which they thought they had some authority, and some of whom became so unstable mentally as to take their lives. And that's why I feel that it's so important that we have a man with your background, your training, that'll step into this position. And lastly, I want to pick up on a note by my distinguished colleague, Senator Chafee. As we look at the reorganization of the CIA, indeed, such emphasis on the Soviet Union in the past can be scaled down in some measure. And those assets and that emphasis, I strongly suggest, be shifted to the economic side of the house, and that you develop and augment the staff that can support your constituency of the departments of the Treasury, of Energy, of Commerce, the Customs Department, and work on this question of stealing our technology. Unlike matters of national security, where you can deal with your counterparts on an equal basis throughout the world on national security, when it comes to trade and commerce, we have very few friends in the world, if any. It's everybody for himself in this world economy. And I think we've got to strengthen that side. And, Mr. Chairman, if confirmed, we'll have a new CIA director who needs no on-the-job training. Good luck.
Thank you very much, Senator Warner. I'm now going to turn to Senator Hollings of South Carolina for his opening statement. Senator Hollings, of course, also chairs the Commerce Committee and chairs the subcommittee in Appropriations, which deals with many sensitive national security programs and brings that perspective also to the work of our committee. Senator Hollings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll ask that my prepared statement be included.
No objection.
And Mr. Gates, it's been suggested that the committee should be more interested in the future rather than what happened back in '85 and '86. I would appreciate the reliability and credibility of what you intend in the future if you can convince us of the reliability and credibility of what you stated in 1986. That was at the end of a marathon cat and mouse game between the White House and the Congress relative to Iran-Contra. Everyone knew that aid was getting to the Contras down in Nicaragua. And Congressman Bolin over on the House side put his famous Bolin amendments, one after the other. First, that you couldn't give aid under that particular defense appropriations bill to the Contras. Then, seemingly, since it was reasoned that maybe it wasn't for the Contras, but really for our own intelligence, the prohibition was that you couldn't use the money for intelligence, directly or indirectly down in Nicaragua. And that didn't catch them. They'll stop it. And then they put another amendment on that you couldn't use the CIA directly. Any monies that appropriated to the CIA would not be used for Iran-Contra. Now, you came on board at the end of this thing, but it was still ongoing and before its exposure. And in your confirmation as Deputy Director for Central Intelligence, you said, Mr. Casey and I have consulted extensively, I'm quoting, consulted extensively even in my present position in all areas of intelligence policy, including not just analysis and estimates, but also organization, budgeting, the requirements process, decisions of technical collection, systems, covert action, congressional relations, and the others. I will now have a formal role in all of these areas. Director Casey and I have discussed my forthcoming duties, and we intend to integrate our officers so that I will be involved in all areas of decision making. So the question is, with that pledge to the Congress, how did you not become involved in all areas, or specifically Iran-Contra? As I understand, I've been told by several White House representatives that you are highly intelligent. We know it, of a high integrity. We know that. And yet they said a person of that integrity and intelligence wouldn't dare come if there was any vulnerability with respect to this question. I have yet to hear a good logical answer how you're going to get in all of these things. And now you have Mr. Casey, who said he knew nothing about it. We now know he knew all about it. Mr. North saying that he knew all about it. Mr. North saying that he misrepresented to the Congress. And the two down underneath, Fires and George, seemingly knowing something about it, and you right in the middle, and with your representation, not knowing. So I would like to know, and the public would like to know about that specifically. Secondly, with respect to the character, reliability of our own intelligence. I served on the Hoover Commission back in 1954 and 5, investigating the intelligence activities of the CIA and all intelligence of this government. And I can tell you categorically back there we know and found way better briefings, better information with less than 800. Now Lally Weymouth writes in the Washington Post that we've got over 800 super grades, senator grade pay analysts, I should say. That caused me to put in an amendment here in this committee to cut this blooming thing a couple of $1 billion, just get it down to size. If I took over your job in the next 10 minutes, let's say, as director of CIA, I'd want that kind of excuse or mandate just to clean out, cut back, and congeal and shorten somehow the field report to the actual analyzed report given us in Washington. Specifically, General Schwarzkopf said he couldn't depend upon it. He had to depend upon field intelligence, otherwise he'd have never gone forward in the Gulf. So we've got to do some cutting back there, and we've got to cut out the over-analyzing. And in that light, finally, since you are the analyst, there's a tremendous difference between the field operative and the analyst, and in fact, I have found very, very reliable our field folks. I travel, I see, I go ask for the agency representative as I travel, And as I talk to them, they're on the ball, they're up to date, they know what they're doing, but somehow it's not coming through to us here in Washington. And I want to know, as an analyst and grown up on that side, how you intend to really instill the confidence and the enthusiasm and loyalty of the field operatives in the Central Intelligence Agency. That'll be one big task you'll have at the very beginning should you be confirmed. Keep these things in mind as we go forward with the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Hollings. Next, I'll turn for his opening statement to Senator Cranston from California. Senator Cranston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to join in welcoming Dr. Gates to the committee. I've known Bob Gates for a number of years, and while we've not always agreed on policy issues, I've found him to be a highly competent and qualified professional. It is a measure of his accomplishments that again he has been nominated to be Director of Central Intelligence. There are a number of issues that must be aired fully before this hearing process is complete. The unsettling questions raised during Dr. Gates' nomination hearing in 1987 concerning his role and knowledge of the Iran-Contra affair must be put to rest to the best of our ability and the ability of Dr. Gates. Other questions have been raised about whether the nominee distorted the content of intelligence analysis to promote preconceived policy questions, his role in the arming of Iran during the Iran-Iraqi war, and other alleged actions. These are important questions. As I look around this committee, I see a wealth of expertise, including yourself, Mr. Chairman, concerning the Iran-Contra affair, and I'm confident these subjects will be thoroughly covered. But there are other non-Iran-Contra issues that are equally important as we consider the future roles, missions, and functions of U.S. intelligence. It is this area where I intend to focus much of my questioning. There are two primary factors that will change the conduct of U.S. intelligence activities: the end of the Cold War and a declining budget environment. It's become a cliche to say that the world is changing. It has changed. It changed dramatically as recently as a month ago when we witnessed the aborted coup in the Soviet Union and the dramatic aftermath. This raises important issues for the future of U.S. intelligence. For decades, the Soviet military threat has been the central defining factor influencing U.S. intelligence activities. That threat is rapidly fading. Indeed, perhaps it's already vanished. And U.S. intelligence must respond to a world situation that is fundamentally different from what it has been for the past 50 years. The questions are obvious, and they are fundamental. What are the principal threats to national security with which U.S. intelligence must concern itself? And to what extent is U.S. intelligence postured for the responsibilities that lie ahead? Ironically, in many ways, we face a less predictable world. The growth in chemical, biological, nuclear, and missile proliferation throughout the world attests to this fact. Terrorism and hostage-taking are new threats requiring close attention. We must also redefine friend and foe. Closer cooperation with other countries is required. We must reassess the nature of our relationship with other countries. The growth in the intelligence community since World War II in terms of dollars and people has been truly phenomenal. In the current budget climate, it is clear that U.S. intelligence will have to get along with fewer resources, and it's important that the decisions made in this new climate are the right decisions. I believe there will be an inevitable downsizing of the intelligence community, and I believe that while this process will inevitably be a painful one, it is nonetheless one that will create an opportunity for revitalization and renewal. Budget constraints have a way of focusing attention on this question: what are the essential activities of the U.S. intelligence service? At this critical junction in world history, it is necessary that we search with great care for the wisest answer to that question. This is a critical moment for the intelligence community. The individual nominated to serve as Director of Central Intelligence must have the judgment, experience, character, leadership, and vision needed to chart the course for the intelligence community for the decades to come. I've thought a lot about the task a president faces in making appointments. I thought a lot about it when I was running for president. It seemed to me then, and it seems to me now, that the CIA director is the most difficult post for a president to fill. It's totally different from nominating a Supreme Court justice. That's an appointed power shared with the Senate, and it's an appointment to a third branch of our government. Appointing the CIA director is really different in a fundamental way from other appointments within the executive branch that require Senate confirmation. A president must have absolute, total confidence in the individual he chooses to run the CIA. If he doesn't, he can't be confident he knows what's going on. A president must have a close and a very intimate relationship with the CIA director. President Bush has that confidence in Robert Gates. President Bush has that relationship with Robert Gates. For that reason, along with the obvious qualifications of Robert Gates, I start out inclined to support his nomination. Of course, I will reserve final judgment on the nomination until we have reviewed the entire record. It's my hope that this confirmation process will be comprehensive, thorough, and constructive. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your leadership and seeing to it that that's the way we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Cranston. I appreciate your comments. I'm going to turn now for his opening remarks to our colleague from the state of Washington, Senator Gorton. Senator Gorton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The world is an especially fluid and challenging place today. Yesterday's status quo is history today and an anachronism tomorrow. 5 years ago, who would have predicted that communism would end so abruptly, or that the Soviet Union could fracture into a dozen or more independent nations in all possibility? But the triumph of the United States in the Cold War and of democracy and free markets as a way of life to be sought everywhere simply presents us with new challenges and problems which have never been more varied and complex. Intelligence will play a central role in addressing successfully many riddles facing the United States. In battle, intelligence is called a force multiplier. It is the equalizer for the overmatched, the insurance for the strong. Today we face many challenges and need as never before a force multiplier. Even with the experience, knowledge, vision, and leadership we already possess, accurate information will be the key to success. That is the role of intelligence, to be stars for the sailor and to assist the leaders of our nation in navigating treacherous seas. The intelligence community will face innumerable challenges during the next decade. The once dominant Soviet threat has receded but has been succeeded by a mixed bag of concerns. More nations are capable of building and delivering nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons today than ever before. International conflicts may be diminishing, but the potential for domestic unrest and internal conflict in both the second and third worlds is perhaps even greater. Narcotics continue to plague societies throughout the world, destroying lives and controlling governments. Terrorism is a continuing menace. And finally, economic espionage is becoming a more common topic of concern within and between governments. To meet all these perils, the intelligence community must adapt. As much as anything, though, the reality of changes at home will alter our intelligence gathering network. A shrinking budget necessitates change, and with fewer dollars, our next DCI will be expected to do more. At the same time, a cumbersome intelligence organization must reorganize and restructure to become a more efficient, streamlined machine. Finally, as Mr. Gates knows only too well, our intelligence must be more focused and responsive to the needs of its consumers, military, political, and otherwise. These demands will surely test our next Director of Central Intelligence. Mr. Gates, your record as a government servant is long, distinguished, and commendable. Your devotion to public service is clear. You have served 4 presidents, Republican and Democratic alike, and a wide selection of posts. You have been recognized publicly and by your peers as one of the best analysts in the intelligence business. Twice you've received the CIA's highest honor. Predictions you made years ago have been justified by events. You have experience as an analyst and as a consumer, and would be the first analyst to rise to DCI. You have worked closely with both the executive branch and with Congress, and always have stood up for what you believed. Clearly, you have the experience to be DCI. Mr. Gates, as I'm sure you know, I once came back from a disappointing political defeat. After considerable introspection, I returned wiser, I hope, with a greater understanding of my convictions and goals, as well as of my role in this world. Like you, my return was undertaken for and rooted in a love of country. Your love of country, your enthusiasm for this job, are reflected in your willingness to subject yourself to the rigors of this hearing process and to seek confirmation a second time. Welcome and good fortune.
Very much, Senator Gorton. Now I'm going to turn to our colleague from Ohio, Senator Glenn. I might indicate also that Senator Glenn has the responsibility of chairing the Government Operations Committee, and in that capacity has worked closely as a member of this committee on a number of legislative items, including the creation of the position of a statutory independent Inspector General at the CIA. So he's been very much involved in the work of this committee. Senator Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because congressional oversight of intelligence must necessarily be conducted in the black box of secrecy, I believe a unique burden is imposed on this committee because we serve as surrogates not only for the Senate as a whole, but for the American people as well. As members of the U.S. Senate, we are subjected to a confirmation process before the electorate every 6 years. It's a rigorous, it's a very thorough process we all attest to. As representatives of the American people, we have an obligation to be just as rigorous and thorough in our assessment of presidential nominees for positions of high public trust. Of the more than 1,000 positions in the executive branch requiring Senate confirmation, there is no higher position of public trust than that of DCI, literally the custodian of our nation's secrets. I was not a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence when Mr. Gates was a senior official at CIA, nor was I on the committee 4 years ago when Mr. Gates' nomination of DCI was being considered. So I approach these hearings with no preconceived notions from previous hearings about Mr. Gates or his suitability for this position. I'll make up my mind about the nomination after the confirmation hearings have concluded. Our committee's consideration of this important nomination does come, as almost everyone that's spoken previously has said, at an extraordinary time. For almost half a century, Americans' foreign policy, defense, intelligence infrastructure have been focused primarily on the Soviet threat. And during this period, we have viewed most national security issues, justifiably or not, through that narrow prism of the U.S.-Soviet competition. But I don't believe this can any longer be the case, for with the overwhelming rejection of communism in the Soviet Union and elsewhere, the dissolution of their empire, the forces of democratic reform flourishing in the Soviet Union in the wake of the recently failed coup attempt, America's national security bureaucracy must be prepared to come to terms with a rapidly changing world. And having a robust and effective intelligence community is the most important means, I feel, to attain that end. Indeed, timely and accurate intelligence forms the foundation of our foreign policy and defines the threat to U.S. national security that is the basis of our defense spending. The need for intelligence collection assets to monitor rapidly changing developments within the Soviet Union remains significant. Because whether we like it or not, the Soviet Union is the only place in the world right now where there is existent a potential direct threat to the United States. Their missiles are still there in the silos, even as we meet here this morning, still targeted. I'm not saying we have the same threat that, from those days, but it is something that we certainly have to keep up on. Now we're apparently going to have 15 different republics, former Soviet Union members, to deal with. Do we know what the Soviet military control is? Is it less than absolute? So there are things like that that are enormously important questions that we must deal with. We must also focus more attention on other areas of concern, such as the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, what's been called the poor man's nukes, that seem to be interest in these things seem to be popping out like measles all over the world. And we have to keep up with those things if we're going to know what's going on. We need to look at trade, foreign economic developments, environmental change, drug smuggling, terrorism, low-intensity conflict in the third world, illicit export of high technology items. How do we organize to do all of the above? That's really the future of our intelligence community. We can do some of it by satellites, by human, by ELINT, by all the INTs that Senator Chafee mentioned just a little while ago. But and I think there has to be a restructuring within what we concentrate on to accomplish the new goals that we set out for ourselves. Yet with the decline of the Soviet threat, some have argued it's safe to decrease the intelligence budget and significantly reduce our intelligence capabilities. And some have even suggested the CIA is a Cold War relic which has outlived its usefulness and we should do away with it. I strongly disagree with such views. In this unprecedented time of enormous change and uncertainty in the world, our need for the CIA, a robust intelligence budget, I believe, is greater than ever before. As we reduce our military strength, and very substantial reductions over the next few years, to me the need for an intelligence base is increased, if anything. Because if we ever have to expand again, then we need to do it from the best information and intelligence base possible. We may need to reorganize, as has already been mentioned this morning, but not just cut on the basis that we no longer need intelligence around the world. So I'm anxious to hear Mr. Gates' views on these matters, as well as learning where he intends to lead the U.S. intelligence community. Also of great interest to me are the nominee's views on the importance of congressional oversight and the need for accountability by the CIA and the rest of the intelligence community. In his response to our committee's questionnaire, Mr. Gates stated, and I quote, "Accountability with respect to adherence to the law, relevant executive orders, guidelines, and regulations, as well as effective management and performance, is, in my judgment, the fundamental purpose of congressional review of intelligence activities," end of quote. And Mr. Gates, I strongly agree with that statement. I am convinced that the confirmation process is a constructive means of demanding that kind of accountability and enhances public and congressional confidence in the senior leadership of the CIA. Because of my belief in the need for accountability, I, along with Senator Specter, introduced a Senate Bill, S-1003, legislation which would require presidential nomination and Senate confirmation of the CIA's General Counsel and the 5 deputy directors of the CIA. Now, let me hasten to add, this was not an effort to politicize the CIA. It's exactly the opposite. It's an effort made to do everything possible to make certain that CIA operates without political bias and without fear or favor in making the decisions out there. We want to avoid appointments made solely for political purposes. That should be the last place in our whole government, CIA, where we do such things as that. And that's the purpose of this legislation. And so I'm anxious to hear Mr. Gates' views on this proposal to enhance CIA's accountability. I would also note this committee will conduct an open hearing on this legislation on September 26th, a week from next Thursday at 2 o'clock in this room. Also of concern to this committee will be its assessment of the nominee's commitment to the integrity of the intelligence process. There are few greater shortcomings in an intelligence officer than cooking the books, as it's called, deliberately distorting or misusing intelligence information and analysis in order just to please policymakers or superiors in the organization. Intelligence collection systems are extraordinarily expensive and for some dangerous. Their lives are even on the line. But if the data collected by these systems is not fairly and thoroughly analyzed and presented to policymakers in an objective and a balanced manner, then these systems become virtually worthless, and the intelligence process becomes nothing but a sham. This committee must determine whether Mr. Gates, by his past conduct as a senior CIA official, is committed to the integrity of the intelligence process and is sufficiently independent of policymakers. The committee is also compelled to examine Mr. Gates' involvement in the Iran-Contra affair. The errors and misjudgments made by senior officials at the CIA during Iran-Contra were deeply damaging to the agency's credibility, morale, and overall effectiveness. And I'm firmly convinced that it will be difficult for CIA to fully restore its credibility and effectiveness in the near term unless it is able to successfully place Iran-Contra in the past once and for all. Recent indictments of former CIA officials and the ongoing investigation of the special prosecutor raise continuing concerns about what senior agency officials knew and didn't know about the Iran-Contra affair, and whether there was deliberate misleading of the Congress. These uncertainties could remain for months, if not years, and this committee must certainly review Mr. Gates' involvement in the Iran-Contra and ultimately determine whether he is the right person to place Iran-Contra in the agency's past, as it must turn to build and confront a challenging future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Glenn. The Chair now recognizes for his opening comments the Senator from New York, Senator D'Amato.
Welcome Bob Gates to the hearing, and so that we might have an opportunity to hear him sometime today, I'm going to ask that the full text of my remarks be placed in the record as if read in its entirety.
Without objection.
I would like to make one observation, and I think Senator Glenn touched on something that is most important. I'm interested in learning what Bob Gates' views are on the future and how the U.S. intelligence agency should be preparing to meet the challenges of the future. I want to know what he thinks about the structure of the U.S. intelligence and what its priorities should be. And I share Senator Glenn's concern that there are some who believe that this is an opportunity to cut back on our intelligence efforts. I'm concerned about that. I want to hear the director's, the potentially new director's views. I think he will be confirmed. I intend to support him, barring unforeseen developments, and I'm confident that Bob is going to be able to answer the tough and probing questions that will be put to him. But I'm most concerned what his views will be as it relates to where we should be going, what our emphasis should be on, and again, with some particularity, can we afford to make the kinds of cuts that some have suggested? Is this the time to cut back on our human intelligence efforts, and maybe is there a need to expand upon them, given what I would characterize as poor performances in certain areas, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, the Middle East, and the fact that it seems in many cases, take the Iraqi situation, that we're behind the curve. The fact that we have heard this committee and each and every member time after time that we don't have the human resources, that we get the technical equipment, but we don't have people in place to give us the kinds of insights most necessary. What does this portend for the future? What about the poor man's A-bomb? What do we know about the kinds of problems that can emerge from these unstable areas? So that's what I would hope we could be focusing on, and I thank the chair.
Thank you very much, Senator D'Amato. And now I'll turn to Senator from Arizona, Senator DeConcini, for his opening comments.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Gates, I'm sure you're wondering just how long this torture will go on. But I think it's important to note that the interest of this committee, that so many members are here, number one, and want to express to you their confidence, their quandaries, their questions about you, but indeed their respect that they have for you. I first want to commend the distinguished chairman, Mr. Bourne, Senator Bourne, and also the vice chairman, Mr. Murkowski, for their tireless efforts
to ensure that each of us on this committee had a voice in the process of putting together these hearings. I appreciate that immensely, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman. The process is important, and though it's laborious at times, and may be right now most laborious, in my judgment, it has been fair and will be a fair hearing, and Mr. Gates will have an opportunity to clear the air, perhaps once and for all, regarding all these questions that have been raised. I was one of the senators on this committee who took great exception to President Bush's criticism of the committee for the handling of the nomination. I believe the President's statement that was something to the effect, and I believe it's correct, quote, "They," meaning us, "ought not to panic and run like a covey of quail because somebody has made an allegation against a man whose word I trust was truly out of line." I trust Mr. Gates' word. It's going to be under oath, and I have no reason to doubt what he tells us when he tells us. The President needed only to review the stacks and stacks of documents and testimony that I've looked at least, involving Mr. Gates and other CIA personnel, to understand the enormous task faced the committee and its efforts to provide Mr. Gates with a fair hearing. I understand the importance of this position to the President. I realize his confidence in you, Mr. Gates, is unsurpassed, and that, to me, bodes very well for your confirmation. I start from a presumption favoring nominees sent by the President for our confirmation process, because I know that he would not purposely, any president, send someone who is unqualified. But here there are allegations, lingering ones, maybe unfair ones, but that's what the process is all about. In the end, I think the delays somewhat rest with you, Mr. Gates, in that you can't help it, but with these allegations hanging out there, there had to be ample time to review them and to prepare for you and for members of the committee and the staff. Your involvement, or non-involvement perhaps, in the Iran-Contra scandal has been touched on here numerous times. The accusation of the politicizing of intelligence reports, the President's strong view in his own non-politicizing the reports, your statements that I've read over the years of the importance not to do that, the sharing of information with Iraq, whatever that may be, the numerous other issues that have been brought to the attention of the committee must be gone into. It is Mr. Gates' memory loss that has this senator concerned, meetings, briefings, conversations that led to some of the delay. It has been his lack of memory, Mr. Gates, that the fact that you could not remember meetings and what have you. But I understand that. Time passes. You're a busy man. You have been deeply involved with other national security efforts and briefings of the President, and perhaps the time will work in your benefit to be able to pursue and to explain to us some of these discrepancies. I find it hard to believe that an individual who personally said 5 years ago that Director Casey and I have discussed my forthcoming duties and intend to integrate our offices so that I, meaning you, Mr. Gates, will be involved in all areas of decision-making, and that you could not know or care to know about critical issues that those above and below you were well aware of. I think this is the opportunity, Dr. Gates, for you to lay the record clean and to convince us. I believe you can do that based on your past experience. I've had numerous calls from members of the administration who I have had a working relationship with and great respect, complimenting you. I was in Boston last night, came across Cardinal Law, who's a big fan of yours, and he said, "Don't forget my friend Bob Gates." And I don't know how well you know him, but those are the kind of people that you have speaking up for your integrity and your ability. You have an opportunity here to be totally truthful and to demonstrate what your leadership qualities are going to be. The director of the American intelligence community in the 1990s, I can think of no more important job for the well-being of this nation, and of course the advice to the President and others in the cabinet. In addition to the Iran-Contra issues, that will be focused on this week. I plan to question you, Mr. Gates, on accusations that have been brought to the attention of this committee concerning the politicalization, your efforts in the area of the papal paper and background done, I believe, in 1985. I have no hidden agenda or any bombshell that I intend to lay upon you. Questions that I think you can probably explain regarding the BCCI and the sharing of intelligence with our, quote, allies, as temporary as they may be. And finally, I need to know how you, Robert Gates, would streamline and make more efficient an intelligence community that I believe needs real strong leadership at this particular time. When I look at the U.S. intelligence community, it reminds me of the U.S. auto industry at the start of the 1980s. The next director of the CIA is going to have to restructure and is going to have to make some very difficult decisions in this senator's judgment. These committees that oversee the CIA can play an important role, and your past statements regarding oversight is very encouraging. I don't think there's anybody on these committee who wants to be destructive in our oversight, but there are legitimate questions as to what the CIA does with its taxpayers' funds and what do we get from it. I look forward to the testimony that you're about to give. I'm hopeful that you, Mr. Gates, your memory has improved since the last time you appeared before the committee in order to sufficiently address the many unanswered questions that hang over this nomination. In this senator's mind, we have an extremely bright and capable man that has the confidence of the president, and that is very important and will influence this senator. Nevertheless, you must answer questions which have been raised regarding the lack of judgment and leadership in order to be considered for the director's position. I have an open mind. I've not decided how I'm going to vote, and the presumption favors you at this moment in my mind. But I do have questions that I'm sure you will address. Thank you, Mr. Gates, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator DeConcini. Senator Metzenbaum was here with us at the beginning of these hearings this morning. He's, of course, also has responsibilities in the Judiciary Committee at this moment with the confirmation hearings proceeding there. He's rejoined us, and now I recognize Senator from Ohio for his opening comments.
Thank you very much, Senator Bourne, and I do want to apologize to my colleagues whose opening statements I didn't hear, and also indicate to you that my failure to be here full-time is not from a lack of interest, but I don't have a split personality that can be at two committees at the same time. Mr. Gates, as you know, I've expressed misgivings about moving forward with this confirmation process today. While I'm sure that both you and the President feel strongly that you have waited long enough, I honestly fear that we are gathered here prematurely. Nevertheless, we will proceed to ask questions to seek answers. But throughout, I believe we will be hobbled in our efforts because I know that there is and will continue to be a closed and unattainable body of information to which we have no access. I am referring to the files and records of the ongoing Special Prosecutor's investigation. You are a subject, but not a target of that investigation, as I'm informed. I am not suggesting that the prosecutor's files include information which, if known, would persuade us to vote against you. I don't know that to be the case. I simply believe that in order for the members of this committee to make an informed and well-considered decision in voting for or against your nomination, we should know all the facts. The Special Prosecutor, Mr. Walsh, has now spent several years investigating the activities stemming from our country's illegal involvement in Iran and Nicaragua. That involvement was first revealed to the people of this country in November 1986, while you were Deputy Director of the CIA. Mr. Walsh considers your role in those activities to be worthy of inquiry. His office has so far brought indictments against 2 CIA officials who reported to you, at least one of whom I understand we will be questioning in the course of these hearings. Your superior at the CIA, the late Mr. Casey, was also deeply involved in those illegal activities. I'm frank to say to you, many of us wonder how, in an organization whose motto boasts, "Know the truth," you as a top official could know so little of it? The CIA's very mandate is to gather and analyze information. You were well trained to carry out that mandate. Now we are left to believe that you failed in that responsibility. You failed to know what everyone around you knew so well. You have also said you didn't want to know. The questions raised by these circumstances are painfully obvious. You were the number 2 official in the CIA at the time of Iran-Contra. Number 1, Director Casey knew and perhaps engineered the affair. Number 3, Claire George knew what was happening when it was happening. At least one CIA official who reported to Mr. George knew as well. Mr. Dick Kerr, who was at the time Deputy Director of Intelligence and is now Acting Director of the CIA, says he told you of suspicions about illegal activities months before they were revealed. You were absolutely surrounded by the truth. Question is, how could you possibly not know? As number 2 man at the agency, willful ignorance is inexcusable. Perhaps we will learn the answer to this improbable puzzle when you testify and in the course of these hearings. I hope so. I hope you offer us a cogent, believable explanation for why or how Robert Gates could be unaware, as the CIA and members of the National Security Council staff defied stated U.S. policy on Iran, broke laws restricting their activities in Central America, refused to inform the legislative branch of this government, and then lied to Congress and grand juries seeking to learn the truth about those activities. If you can satisfy me with an explanation as to how you didn't know, why you didn't want to know, I expect I will vote for you. I must admit, however, that I am skeptical about your ability to give us such an explanation, because you seem to have great difficulty in recalling events, and this is particularly disturbing. In the written questionnaire you completed for this committee this summer, I counted no less than 33 instances in which you failed to recall your role in Iran-Contra related events. Mr. Gates, you are a very intelligent man. Your failure to recall the answers to 33 questions posed to you by this committee, frankly, is not credible. I hope your memory improves during the course of these hearings, and I noticed Senator DeConcini also mentioned that point. Additionally, there are certain events that we haven't asked you about, simply because we only learned about them in the wake of recent indictments brought by Mr. Walsh's office. Over and above this failure to recall, more than 40 of your answers were not that you didn't recall, but that you never knew, or better stated, that you never sought to know. For example, I understand you never reviewed Oliver North's notebook pages, which referred to you on several key dates. Frankly, that's hard to understand, difficult to believe. Oliver North's trial could not have had more public attention. The notes were available if you had asked to see them. It's unbelievable that you would not have made an effort to review that portion which referred to you. It suggests an unwillingness to learn the facts, as reported by Oliver North to himself in his own diary. Furthermore, when the committee asked you questions about references to you in Oliver North's notebooks, your answer was that you had never saw the notebooks. Whether or not you had seen the notebook pages before the committee submitted its questions to you, why didn't you look at them when you received our written questions? It would have been the logical and straightforward approach. Now, Mr. Gates, our questions will not be limited to your role in Iran-Contra or even to other CIA activities under your watch that people have alleged were against U.S. laws. I will also have questions regarding the future of U.S. intelligence. For example, we now find ourselves with an intelligence service largely designed and developed to combat an enemy which may no longer threaten us. You came up through the ranks of the CIA as an analyst whose expertise is in Sovietology. In today's world, that may have the equivalent currency of a UN interpreter specializing in Latin. Intellectually fascinating, but all but useless in a practical sense. We will want to hear how you plan to retool Central Intelligence to deal with a newly drawn map with many more countries and a foreign policy with new and different challenges. I want to know what your views are on the limits or far-reaching intent of economic intelligence. I would ask how you would acquire it and protect it so it would not benefit one American company over another. We will also want to hear about your efforts and intentions to preserve the integrity of the intelligence estimates and other analysis produced by the agency. As you know, we base much of our foreign policy decisions as well as covert operations on this type of intelligence information, and the purity and objectivity of this analysis should be above reproach. I was interested to read in the morning paper that the chairman has indicated he believes that the intelligence budget can be cut. I will look forward to hearing from you as to your views on that subject and if you agree with him as to the manner in which you would cut it. I will want assurances that the highly qualified CIA experts writing intelligence estimates and reports, those men and women who decipher Middle East factionalism, make projections on power shifts in Africa, monitor the tumult generated by the collapse of the Berlin Wall, interpret flutters in the bamboo curtain, and catalog the erratic climate in the nations to our south, are allowed to evaluate data in the most informed and impartial environment possible. I will want you to resolve questions that have risen suggesting that in the past analysis was influenced by partisan politics or tailored to correspond with policymaker objectives or conform to your personal biases. In short, Mr. Gates, we will want to know how you intend to run the shop. And to help us make that determination, we will want to examine the manner in which you carried out your duties as the head of analysis, as deputy director, and as acting director at the agency which the President now wants you to head. The position of Director of Central Intelligence is one that affects every American. The Director's decisions on analysis and on covert and clandestine operations can vitally affect U.S. foreign policy. The Director's decisions on intelligence operations directed at Americans can potentially affect the freedoms of each of us. And no matter how well this committee does its job, the vast majority of these decisions will be made with no congressional input and often without our knowledge. So our decision on whether to recommend confirmation of this nomination is a crucial one. We cannot shirk this duty, and we will do the American people a great disservice if we take this step thoughtlessly or based on incomplete information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Metzenbaum. I might say, just for information of those involved today, that would be my intention. I'll next recognize Senator Bradley for his opening comments and Senator Moynihan, after which time we will have an introduction of the nominee by the senators from his home state, and then it would be my intention to hear the opening statement of the nominee before we recess, and we'll commence again after that this afternoon. The final opening statement by a member of our committee will be given by the Senator from New Jersey, Senator Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank you for your continuing effort to make sure that we get all the information from the CIA and the intelligence agencies that we need in order to do a thorough job pursuant to our constitutional responsibilities. We still are waiting for some information, and I know that you are actively pursuing that, and I hope that we'll be able to get all of the information so that we can make a judgment. Let me welcome Mr. Gates to the committee once again. And let me begin by saying that I think that these hearings are not just an occasion to re-examine Mr. Gates' role in Iran-Contra. In other words, what he knew, when he knew it, why he didn't find out more sooner, and what he did or did not do as a result. These hearings are an opportunity to open a new debate on the future of the role of intelligence in protecting not just American interests against foreign dangers, but also U.S. taxpayers against unneeded defense spending. The U.S. intelligence community annually spends many billions of dollars and employs tens of thousands of people to avoid the costs of false alarms while keeping us alert to the real dangers. The DCI leads the intelligence community, manages its vast resources, and advises the President and the Congress on these critical issues. That's why we have to appraise Mr. Gates' past record as CIA's former Deputy Director for Intelligence, former Chairman of the National Intelligence Council, former Deputy and Acting DCI, and as the current Deputy Assistant to the President. We have to appraise all of these to ensure that he meets high standards of integrity, judgment, and leadership. In addition to Iran-Contra, we have to evaluate his performance on the two issues that have been central to American security in recent years, the Soviet Union and Iraq. But based on past investigations, a moment needs to go to Iran-Contra. The Iran-Contra scandal began with an error of judgment. In 1985, the National Intelligence Council, which Mr. Gates headed, produced a badly flawed estimate that overestimated Iranian vulnerability and provided the administration with a strategic rationale to help Iran get arms. A few months later, the CIA gave unauthorized support to covert Israeli shipments of U.S. arms to Iran. When Mr. Gates found out about them afterwards, he not only failed to object, but also neither reviewed nor disclosed them to the congressional oversight committees for a year. Moreover, during the summer of 1986, he ignored growing signs that profits from selling arms to Iran were being diverted to the Nicaraguan Contras, contrary to law. Despite his promises to supervise and report all covert activities, he was instrumental in misinforming the Senate committee about the CIA's role in this scandal. The committee will have to decide whether these lapses of judgment were isolated mistakes or part of a pattern in which Mr. Gates tailored intelligence to suit policymakers or his own biases, failed to prevent, protest, or at least warn of improperly authorized activities, or even suppressed damaging information. The reason this question, whether they're isolated incidents or a pattern, is important to decide is because upon confirmation, the Director of Central Intelligence disappears behind a veil of secrecy, accountable to the public only through the congressional oversight committees. If we confirm someone whose past lack of candor or hidden poor judgment and his own failure to exercise leadership, how can we be confident that the CIA will do a good job under his direction in the future? That's a basic question in these hearings. Assuming Mr. Gates satisfies the Committee on Iran-Contra, I think he still has to explain his persistent overstatements of Soviet strengths and insufficient attention to Iraqi threats. His weak record on these crucial issues raises questions about strategic judgment. First, the USSR. Mr. Gates' slowness to recognize the powerful movements toward democratic and nationalist revolutions in the former Soviet Union is cause for concern, especially in view of the data and insights he was getting from intelligence analysts. While he might be excused for belittling the fundamental changes taking place as early as 1986, It is hard to excuse his blindly fatalistic view in 1988 that, in his words, the dictatorship of the Communist Party remains untouched and untouchable, or that, in his words, a long competition and struggle with the Soviet Union lie before us. Today, both the Communist Party and the former Soviet Union are rapidly fading into history. There's no question that Mr. Gates got it wrong. The question is, why? The committee has to decide whether such mistakes were truly impartial errors of judgment or the result of systematic biases to support the bloated defense budgets of the 1980s. For instance, in November 1986, he publicized highly alarming estimates of Soviet strategic laser developments and warned that, in his words, the failure to protect with an American strategic defense would hand the Soviets a unilateral military advantage of historic consequence with awesomely negative implications for strategic stability and peace. This was simply a false alarm. Yet it supported a costly and fruitless quest for wonder weapons and squandered resources that would have been better spent, for example, on ensuring that Patriot missiles were improved to knock out all the Scud warheads in case of conflict in the Persian Gulf. These and other alarmist messages about the Soviet Union that Mr. Gates publicized during the 1980s were embodied in intelligence estimates that he provided to policymakers serving two administrations. Now, let's turn to Iraq. In the mid-1980s, even as the Iran-Contra operation was playing out, the United States tilted more and more forcefully toward Iraq. The things that we know are on the public record are the following. The Reagan and Bush administrations approved $1.5 billion in export licenses for dual-use items. In other words, items that had military applications, such as helicopters, not unlike the ones used to invade Kuwait, or equipment that could be used and could help the Iraqi nuclear program. 2, muffled criticism of Saddam Hussein's gassing of the Kurds. 3, hundreds of millions of dollars in XM and agricultural loan guarantees. And then in 1989, the Bush administration opposed naming Iraq as a terrorist state. And when Congress did so, the president waived the restrictions on agriculture and XM credits. In this atmosphere of cozying up to Iraq and remaining fixated by the Soviet specter, Mr. Gates did not refocus sufficient intelligence resources on the emerging Iraqi threat. Specifically, after Iraq routed Iran unexpectedly in 1988, it clearly increased its military advantage over all its neighbors and intensified its pursuit of technology for strategic and nuclear weapons. Notwithstanding these danger signs, Mr. Gates did far too little to ensure that U.S. policy would be well informed of Iraqi strategic activities, including ballistic missile and weapons of mass destruction, the development of both. As a result, when Saddam Hussein began making more belligerent and specific threats against Kuwait in 1990, the administration had no good alternative to the unreliable reassurances of Arab officials whose interests differed from ours. Fortunately, this failure of intelligence was not catastrophic for the United States, but only because Saddam Hussein had provoked us prematurely before he'd acquired effective chemical or nuclear deterrence. Enemy stupidity is not a reliable substitute for astute guidance. In addition to Mr. Gates' role in the Iran-Contra scandal and his role in failing to refocus U.S. intelligence resources to the emerging Iraqi threat, his involvement generally in U.S. ties with Iraq since 1985 also needs to be examined critically. These ties include not just direct official relationships between governments, but also connections that were the responsibility of the CIA to monitor and to maintain. Indeed, unless all his activities in this regard were authorized under law, I would seriously question his candor and commitment to upholding the law and therefore his fitness to serve. We've been pleasantly surprised by the early endings of the Cold War and the Persian Gulf War, but more diverse challenges to our security and new opportunities to support democratic change in the world lie on the horizon. The basic question is, does Mr. Gates have the record, the vision, and the independence needed to revamp our intelligence community to address these new questions? The floor will be Mr. Gates. He will either answer those questions to the satisfaction of the committee and the American public, or he won't.
Thank you, Senator Bradley. Senator Danforth has been able to join us from responsibilities in another committee, and Senator Danforth, we would be glad to receive your opening statement and the opening comments you'd like to make at this time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm tempted to ask the witness what his position is on the Clarence Thomas nomination, but I won't do so. Mr. Gates, I join my colleagues in welcoming you to these confirmation hearings. You are very well known to this committee and to many members of the Senate as a man with an excellent record of service to our country. Since your nomination by the President, most attention has been focused on your knowledge of and testimony about the Iran-Contra affair. That, of course, is the threshold question which will be addressed by the committee. But I hope that question does not obscure the more global concerns of where we're heading in a post-Cold War era and the ability of our intelligence community to relate comprehensible analysis to policymakers in an objective manner. One of the things for which you're well known is your skeptical view of change and reform in the Soviet Union. You've been known to be the administration's resident pessimist on the prospects of reforms over the past 5 years. But even when minds don't readily change, times change. And times have never changed more rapidly than in the past 2 years. For 45 years, America and its allies have been competing head-to-head with the Soviet Union. We believed that it was a competition of military might, pitting missile against missile, division against division. Military competition consumed our attention and our budget. In the end, it turned out to be a contest not between armies, but between ideas. A free political system was pitted against a totalitarian political system. A free market economic system was pitted against a centrally planned economic system, and our side won. We should have seen the victory coming years ago. Germany was the great test case. One country defeated in war, divided in half, and acting as two huge laboratories testing the theories of freedom and Marxism. The free world was not a judge in that contest. The judges came from Gdansk and Leipzig and Budapest and Prague, from Moscow and St. Petersburg. One after another, they pronounced their verdict. Communism was a failure. Communism did not work and could not be made to work. Communism had lost and freedom had won. All of this has happened in the past 2 years. After World War II, America led the redevelopment of the free world. We did it initially through Marshall Plan growth, through international institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, by encouraging a free and open system of trade, and ultimately by becoming the most powerful engine of economic growth in history. We also did it by adopting a policy of containment, by creating NATO and by creating a national security establishment with the Central Intelligence Agency at its center. Some are now calling for the dissolution of the structures we built during the Cold War, particularly the CIA. Of course, we still face threats: terrorism, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and the breakup of an empire which still has 30,000 nuclear warheads. To be rid of one threat does not make the world safe, but with the collapse of the Soviet Empire, the great threat we faced since 1945 is no longer real. So I'm interested in Bob Gates's vision of the future, Bob Gates's view of the post-Soviet world. I'm interested in what Bob Gates proposes to do with this extraordinary opportunity at the beginning of a new era. The other principal issue I want to discuss has to do with the relationship between policy and intelligence analysis. For example, during the period leading up to the war in the Persian Gulf, did the intelligence community effectively communicate its analysis of whether sanctions would work? At the time of the debate on the Gulf War vote, some claimed that Director of Central Intelligence Webster had changed his assessment of sanctions to conform with the President's policy. My personal conclusion was that Director Webster testified consistently that sanctions by themselves would have no chance of expelling Iraq from Kuwait. But others charged that Director Webster, under pressure from the President, had slanted his analysis to fit the President's policy goal. Some have said that Bob Gates, during his years at CIA, slanted the intelligence community's assessment of the Soviet Union to support his own hardline views. So my first question is this: can the CIA be truly independent in its analysis? Second, can the intelligence community be clear and direct in its assessments? I've attended too many briefings in which it seemed that the objective of the analysts was to cover themselves for any number of possibilities. We don't need the CIA simply to give us the news and the options. We have CNN for that. The issue I'd like to address is, how do you make intelligence analysis bold enough to be clear and independent enough to be forthright? Mr. Gates, you have a wealth of experience to share with us on these matters, and I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much, Senator Danforth. I think that our guest today, having
testimony.
Thank you very much, Senator Danforth. I think that our guest today, having had an opportunity to hear the views of the members of this committee, will understand why I now say that and have said very often, that our committee represents a broad spectrum of views, thoughtful positions. We've been able to listen to each other often because of the nature of our work. It has to be behind closed doors with respect for each other. As I've indicated in my opening statement, we have proceeded in a nonpartisan fashion in the past. We've never had a party line vote, and most of our decisions have represented a broad consensus once they're reached. But in the course of reaching those decisions, we have listened to various points of view. It's a healthy thing, especially on a committee like this, that a broad range of viewpoints are represented, because we are asked to do something that other committees are not asked to do. We're asked to not simply put forward our own views and our own positions, but to act as trustees for the American people, because we have to sit in private, often in secret, and try to help the intelligence community of our government and others reach decisions that are very important, and try to bring to bear the values and the principles of the American people, not only a concept of our national interest in doing so. So I welcome the opportunity that we've had today to introduce to the American people the viewpoints of my colleagues on this committee of both sides of the aisle, and to give the people a glimpse into the kind of deliberative process that we've tried to follow day in and day out in the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. The final opening statement will be made this morning before we turn to the introduction of our nominee by a former distinguished vice chairman of this committee, Senator Moynihan of New York, served long and ably as a member of this committee, has certainly strong conclusions of his own and judgments about the intelligence community and where it should go. We always value his counsel and his advice. We value the continuing relationship that we have had with him as members of this committee, even as he has retired from full membership. So we welcome you back, Senator Moynihan, and would welcome any opening comments that you would like to make before we turn to our nominee this morning.
Mr. Chairman, following Senator Moynihan's statement, I have one request I'd like to make of you.
Before we go. We'd be glad to receive
Mr. Chairman, also, I don't know what Senator Moynihan is going to say, but I'd like to ask him maybe one question.
That would be fine. Senator Moynihan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm back here as an alum, Mr. Gates. I'm sorry that Senator Danforth had to get back to the other hearings, because I was going to say that in his very able remarks, he spoke of the contest of ideas that was involved in the Cold War, and he spoke specifically of the laboratory of Germany and East Germany and West Germany, and the people of Gdansk and such who made their choices. And the point I'd like to just be specific about, and it's nothing to do with anybody, nothing to do with you, sir, is simply this, that in 1986, the Central Intelligence Agency published data that showed that the per capita GDP in East Germany was higher than West Germany. Now, any taxi driver in Berlin could have told you that wasn't so. And yet a large institution not only thought it was so, but published it, and didn't even see that there was something incongruous. And institutions get into problems like that. We all can think of them that have done, think of those who've done. And I'd like to speak briefly about that. If this is a little abstract, may I say that this subject is intelligence, and it's supposed to be kind of brainy work. I was, sir, at the beginning of this Congress, I introduced a bill that would have just simply divided it's called End of the Cold War bill, to divide the agency up as between the military intelligence to go to the Defense Department and political economic intelligence to go to the State Department. I have no brief for that particular proposal. It was meant to raise the subject. Are the present arrangements the ones we would best serve us best? And it now begins to appear that as recently as 10 months ago, you couldn't talk of the intelligence of the Cold War having been over. It was not yet agreed to in this city. Just a little narrative. I came on the committee in 1977. And by the late 70s, it seemed to me that the evidence was pretty strong that the Soviet Union was about to break up. In 79, I wrote that the Soviet Union would break up in the 1980s. I said it on the floor, I said it here and there, and I argued it in our committee, up in the dome where we used to be. And the proposition was twofold, that the Marxist-Leninist system was based upon two predictions. The first was the superiority of socialist production over capitalist production. And the second was the disappearance of ethnicity, of nationality, as they would say, of the attachments of religion, of language, of race, what you like. These were very fundamental predictions. New Soviet man would not have any of those latter things. And it was very clear to me that both those predictions were failing. My first clue on the economy was in '75 when Murray Fessbach over at the Bureau of the Census, in that area of foreign census work, found that male life expectancy in the Soviet Union was dropping. Well, that meant that the Khrushchev had got it wrong. They had not overtook and surpassed us by 1970. You collect so much information in life expectancy data. And there's, fellow demographer. Demography is destiny, and that destiny looked bad. Simultaneously, the case of ethnic attachments were more and more The Murkowskis did not think they were Russians yet, and they never were going to think they were Russians, and there's nothing to do about that. And the Metzenbaums would really just soon leave the place, and so forth. Now, when two central ideas like that fail, you're going to get a crisis of belief. Often that belief disappears just under the surface. People don't know they can share what they now think until suddenly someone says it, and then everyone says it. A crisis of belief would lead to the crisis of the regime, which would lead to the breakup in the 1980s. Now, in all this time, you never could get any response out of the agency. They didn't bother to say, that's a good try, but you got it wrong. They just didn't hear you. The youth would say they couldn't access that file. They just didn't hear you. Partly it was because their estimates of the size of the Soviet economy were so incredibly wrong. As late as in the late 70s, the agency had the Soviet economy at a median adjusted figure at 62% of American GNP and rising. This was not something just happened. It goes back to the 50s. The Gaither report. Gaither report would have the Soviet GNP surpassing ours next year. The algebra of the Gaither report. Alan Dulles in 1959 would testify that the Soviets were growing at 8 to 9% a year. That doubles every decade. They'd be ahead of us by now. And the agency could never break out of that. Nor could they ever bring into their calculations something sort of abstract and sort of things you talked about in Paris, like, ethnicity and things like that. And so there was just no response. And the presidents kept being told, see, if President of the United States were told, Mr. President, the Soviet Union is the economy of the Soviet Union is 1/5 that of the United States and dropping, I think the 80s, the 70s, the 60s would have been different. But they said it's 2/3 and closing, or almost 2/3. Now, Admiral Turner has an article in the current issue of Foreign Affairs, and I'm not going to say much more, but just to say that to bring in, cite authority when in doubt. He said he speaks of this. He says, beyond that, the quality of intelligence and analysis has never met our expectations. He cites a remark by me that for a quarter of a century, the CIA has been repeatedly wrong about the major political and economic questions entrusted to its analysis. Repeatedly wrong. He says, note that significantly the senator cited only political and economic analysis, not military. That's an important fact. We got military, I think, very well. We took pictures. But these other things we missed. He speaks of the first feelings that, gee, if their economy is weak and their military is rising, isn't that going to lead to a crisis? He says, neither I nor the CIA analysts reached the conclusion that eventually something had to give. At a time we were arguing in the committee something was going to give, and something did give. He said, and I'd like to, this is Admiral Stansfield Turner in the current issue of Foreign Affairs. We should not gloss over the enormity of this failure to forecast the magnitude of the Soviet crisis. He says there's some revisionist, today we hear some revisionist rumblings that the CIA did in fact see the Soviet collapse. He said, no. On this one, the corporate view missed by a mile. And here's my very simple proposition. If the agency can't confront this and live with it and say, well, all right, it's like pencils have erasers, we really did miss it, then they, as an institution, they're doomed. And I don't know the answer. Last July, we held a full day's hearings in the Foreign Relations Committee on estimating the size and growth of the Soviet economy. We asked the Soviet expert the analyst from the agency, and he said, in my statement, I plan to review for you our methodology and cite previous public testimony that I believe will show that essentially we were right in our descriptions of the Soviet economy over time and in its prospects. Now, Mr. Chairman, they weren't. And, you know, it's not that they have to be that defensive, because, I mean, one of the other people testified that day was Dale Jorgensen, who's professor of economics at the Kennedy School, and he wrote afterward and said, yeah, we all got it wrong. He said, and I quote, it has to be one of the great failures of economics, right up there with the inability of economists to find a remedy for the Great Depression of the 1930s. You know, you could say you're wrong, but if you can't do that, you have ceased to be, whatever else you are, you're not an intelligence organization. And I simply want to say one thing, what that will bring you. And if you love that agency, and I do, and couldn't even begin to do as you do, you don't want that to happen, sir. But I'm really, I mean, what will happen is very simple. In 3 presidents from now, the woman's going to come along and say, Central Intelligence. Let's see. Now we've finished up the Small Business Administration. What's next? You know, it's the interim period. You're finding candidates. Okay, we got SBA. What's this other one? CIA. Oh yeah. They're the people who missed the Soviet Union's collapse completely, aren't they? Well, fine. Wasn't there a fellow who ran the campaign in Western Pennsylvania? We didn't carry Pennsylvania, but he did a good job. Give it to him. And that happens, sir. And I just hope it need not happen, but an institutional renewal is not easy, and it has to begin with acknowledgement of problems. And that's all I wish to say to you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Moynihan.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question I wanted to ask at the proper time.
Yes, does Senator Bradley have a question to Senator Moynihan? Before Senator Moynihan departs, let me entertain that question, then I'll entertain the question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Senator Moynihan, thank you very much for your comments. And I wonder if you wouldn't share with us a little bit your thoughts about the proposition that when you deny reality, as you are saying the agency essentially did, there is a connection between denying that you actually did something, when in fact you did, and denying reality. The agency, from time to time, has denied that it has in fact done certain things. And one incident comes to mind, which is during your tenure as vice chairman, the question was the mining of the Nicaraguan harbors, or the mining of the, I think it was harbors. And as I recall, there was as entrenched a denial of that as you've just described denying the reality of the Soviet Union. And I also wonder if you could tell us what happened. I mean, did they just deny it and share with us, because I think it's very important that we understand a culture in addition to what the challenges are substantively.
Well, that's not an easy thing to talk about. I will. I never have in any such setting. And the things that I don't think should be forgiven, the effort to discredit Barry Goldwater by the Central Intelligence Agency should not be forgiven and should be acknowledged. Listen, I believe in forgiveness, but not save on condition of confession. They set out to destroy the reputation of Barry Goldwater. It came very simply in the, I don't have the dates at hand, but they're very easily brought up. In somewhere in early April, Barry and I, he was chairman, I was vice chairman. God, he loved that agency. Only this side of TAC Air did he love that agency. And he'd do anything for it. And he and I got along very well. And we spent an awful lot of time, just the chairman and vice chairman being, briefed, and a very bipartisan committee, just as you run, sir, Mr. Mikowski runs. we suddenly discovered that the CIA had been mining harbors in Nicaragua. And we knew immediately that we had not been told about this in advance, and it had to be a significant anticipated activity, as the statute then read. I don't know what it reads now. And we had been told of enough things that we knew when we were not told. We told of trivial things. I mean, we got sometimes overwhelmed by that. And he couldn't believe it. He wrote a letter to the then Director, Mr. Casey, said, this is a violation of international law. I can't understand what's going on, and frankly, I am expletive deleted off. And that letter got into the papers a few days later. There proceeded what in the tradecraft, and I've been an ambassador abroad, I've been involved in these things, it's called disinformation. The word was put out, very simply, that Barry Goldwater, who on a slow day was faster than anybody else in our committee and anybody else I could run, on a slow day he was up to anything that you would want to. They put it out that, well, of course he'd been told, but don't you understand, he's getting old and he can't remember and maybe he wasn't paying attention. Posters were put up all around Langley saying, of course the committee was told. Bud McFarlane, the National Security Advisor, was sent to the Naval Academy. And that's consecrated ground, the Naval Academy. All right? All right? Sir, Mr. Secretary. And told the cadets that the chairman and the vice chairman had been briefed. Lied to them. Mr. McFarlane later told, under oath, told Senator Sarbanes, yes, sir, I said it. Yes, sir, it was not true. You don't lie to naval cadets. They did, about Barry Goldwater. And he wouldn't take it. He knew damned well it wasn't true, and he wouldn't take it, and he wouldn't take it, and the columns of the editorials kept saying, well, of course he won't take it because he can't understand, he can't remember that he didn't. Not true. It's okay if you do it to a Pakistani politician you're mad at, but not to Barry Goldwater. Well, the chairman did, sir, come up to our hearing, and in the secrecy of the dome, the director of DCI apologized. He said, I apologize. But it needs to be part of the record of something that'll never happen again. Never lie to naval cadets. Never lie about Barry Goldwater.
Thank you, Senator Moynihan. Appreciate your comments. Appreciate you taking time with us, and we're dedicated, as you know, to establish a relationship and a process between this committee and the agency that will assure the kind of candor in the future that should always be there, and we appreciate your comments very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Chafee, you had one question to address.
Yes, a question of you, Mr. Chairman. It seems to be accepted in the statements here, and I'm referring, if I had it correct, to the statement by Senator Metzenbaum, that Director Casey knew of the diversion of the funds to the Contras. No question about this is a given. Now, I've studied this record pretty clearly, and the only evidence that I know of to date that Director Casey knew of the diversion of the funds came from Ollie North. And what I'm asking you, Mr. Chairman, that if I'm mistaken, and if there is evidence, other evidence beside that of Ollie North, and Ollie North's evidence, as I understand, was given after Casey died, if there's other evidence, I would appreciate if the General Counsel could refer me to that evidence. I haven't found it, and yet there seems to be a general thrust here in the presentations that the nominee was below somebody who knew, and now there's a suggestion that those below him knew, namely George, and he's a rose between two thorns, or however one wants to describe it, and so clearly he should have known. Now, if I'm incorrect, I'd like to have correction to that.
Senator Chafee, I, to the best of my memory, believe that you are correct, that in terms of any statement in the record, any sworn testimony in the record of either this committee or earlier the Iran-Contra committee or other legal proceedings, I believe that the only direct testimony, sworn testimony in the record, directly to the point as to whether Director Casey knew of the diversion, was given, a testimony given by Colonel North. I don't know of any other testimony. I would have to say that, of course, it's possible in the course of these hearings there could be other testimony that might come forward. We are certainly, as you know, we'll be hearing from Mr. Fires. We have already taken the sworn testimony of the chief of the Latin American Division, former chief of the Latin American Division of the CIA. We are still requesting testimony from Mr. George, which to this point in time, there's been no agreement that he would give such testimony, absent immunity, which the committee cannot provide because of the actions of the independent counsel, although it's clear from at least the response that Mr. George has made to the indictments returned against him that he has denied his own knowledge. So it would probably follow that he would deny, therefore, having imparted knowledge or known of knowledge on the part of others. So we can only surmise what his testimony might be if he doesn't give it. So I believe that the Senator is correct. To the best of my knowledge, he's correct. Again, searching my memory back during the time that I was a member of the special committee as well, that the only sworn testimony to the knowledge of Director Casey was that given after Director Casey's death by Colonel North.
On that note, Mr. Chairman, we now have, during the course of the proceedings here this morning, information that perhaps Colonel North's status before the special prosecutor has changed.
Yes, sir. There's an Associated Press report that the special prosecutor's office has said today that it has dropped its case against Oliver North.
Well, that might give rise to the ability of this committee then to receive his testimony directly on that crucial point. Would the chairman and the council and the vice chairman entertain that?
Well, certainly, let me take that under advisement. I have not had a chance to think about, since this report was only handed to me a few minutes ago, what the implications might be. Something we'd want to discuss with the special counsel as well, because he has other matters ongoing that might be impacted. We've tried to cooperate in every way, but I'll certainly take that up, and we'll.
I thank the chair. I think it's one that should be explored.
Let me just ask the general counsel, Mr. Snyder, as far as he knows, is my statement correct as far as your? So the general counsel indicates that he believes my statement is correct, that in terms of the sworn testimony in the record as to Director Casey's knowledge, that it is only that of Colonel North, given after Director Casey's death.
I think it's an interesting suggestion the senator from Virginia makes, and maybe the committee ought to discuss that at a later point.
I think that would be appropriate for us to have that discussion again after we've had some time to think about it.
Mr. Chairman, while it's not relevant to sworn testimony, the statement made by Mr. Casey at his deathbed to the reporter may have some bearing, but certainly is not sworn testemony.
Not be sworn testimony.
I'd enjoy getting that reporter up before this committee, Mr. Chairman. That would be.
I'm going to proceed with the introduction of the nominee. I think at this point, I'd like to ask our colleagues from the home state of the nominee to please come forward and join the nominee at the witness table. The nominee will be formally presented by distinguished Minority Leader of the Senate, Senator Dole, and his colleague, Senator Kassebaum. As we all know, Mr. Gates is a native of the state of Kansas. He'll also be joined in that presentation by Senators Robb and Senator Warner of Virginia, as Mr. Gates currently resides, has resided for some time in the state of Virginia. Let me say that after I think that after that we will have the opening statement from the nominee, and then we will have a recess. Questioning on the committee will proceed in the afternoon, beginning and following an order of seniority because of the responsibilities of members in other committees and on the floor. So that will give members of the committee a notice of the order in which they will be called upon to ask their questions. It's a pleasure to have our colleagues with us this morning, and I'd be happy to recognize first the distinguished Minority Leader, Senator Dole, to present the nominee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it very much. If anybody has a real time conflict, I'd be happy to yield any other first, but I consider this an honor and a privilege to be here this morning with my colleague from Kansas, Senator Kassebaum, and with our two colleagues from Virginia, and with our fellow Kansan, Bob Gates. So it is a privilege, and I talked to your brother Jim this morning. I wish you good luck, Bob. Said you talked to him yesterday. I'd ask consent that my entire statement made a part of the record.
Without objection.
A great deal has been written and reported about this nomination since President Bush announced it a little over 4 months ago. Unfortunately, a lot of that has been based on a whispering campaign of rumor, innuendo, and speculation. But today, at last, the committee will start putting the focus on something a little bit different and more important, the facts. That's where the focus ought to be. The record of Bob Gates, his experience, his accomplishments, and yes, those areas where the committee and the Senate have legitimate questions obviously should be addressed. And make no mistake about it, Bob Gates is ready to answer those questions. The bottom line is that no person is more qualified to serve as CIA director in these challenging times than Bob Gates. Being born in Kansas, in and of itself, may not be reason enough for this committee to vote to confirm Bob Gates. But it's certainly a good start.
As close to Oklahoma as you can get.
Right, I mean, Wichita is very close. He also embodies the values and beliefs of Kansans, values of hard work and service to your country, and a belief that a man's word is his bond, and that's very important in this committee, and I've listened to a number of members, and I'm certain that's going to be a very key issue. His unparalleled record of service to his country is well known to members of this committee, but I want to take just about a minute to emphasize it and to summarize it because I think it's important. It's a very remarkable career. And I've listened with great interest to all the statements that Bob Gates cannot possibly know everything, now or in the past or any other time. None of us could take that test either. But his first tour of duty in the CIA began in 1965, where he served as an intelligence analyst and one of two assistant national intelligence officers for strategic programs. And during this period, Bob found time to earn a doctorate in Russian and Soviet history from Georgetown University. In '74, he was assigned to the National Security Council, where he served Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter. He returned to the CIA in late '79 and was subsequently appointed to a series of increasingly responsible management positions, including National Intelligence Officer of the Soviet Union. In January of '82, President Reagan appointed Bob Gates as Deputy Director for Intelligence, a position in which he served for nearly 4.5 years. For much of this time, he also served as chairman of the National Intelligence Council, where he directed the preparation of all national intelligence estimates. For 5 months, he also served as acting director of the CIA. I believe his work in dramatically improving the quality of the agency's intelligence reporting is well known to the committee. In August of 1989, President Bush appointed Bob Gates as an assistant of the President, Deputy for National Security, where he has teamed with Brent Scowcroft and the President on virtually every critical national security issue America's faced, most notably the Gulf War. And the point I would make, he's been on both sides. He's been an intelligence officer, and he's also been on the receiving side as deputy to Brent Scowcroft. He's twice received the CIA's highest award, the Distinguished Intelligence Medal, as well as receiving the National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal. Along with winning awards, he has also won the confidence and respect of members of the intelligence and diplomatic community around the globe, and obviously members of this committee. He's won a reputation as one of the preeminent analysts of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. And perhaps most importantly, he has also won the confidence and respect of President Bush, who believes, as I do, that no one possesses his breadth of experience, and Bob Gates is well qualified for the job he's been nominated. Simply put, no one has had the experience in gathering, analyzing, and receiving intelligence. Mr. Chairman, my colleagues, that's the record. It is a record of accomplishment, a record of intelligence, and a record of integrity. It's a record that has earned this nominee a fair and expeditious hearing from this committee. No one will seek, of course, to deny members of this committee and members of the Senate from asking Mr. Gates whatever questions they deem important. But once the questions are asked and answers are given, that should be that. Either you believe Bob Gates has the experience to run the CIA, that his testimony is truthful, or you don't. This nomination and the direction of our intelligence capability must not be delayed or allowed to twist in the wind any longer. And when all is said and done, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman, I am confident this committee and the full Senate will come to the same conclusion that I have, that Bob Gates is uniquely qualified by experience and by intelligence and by integrity to serve as director of the CIA. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for allowing me to appear this morning.
Thank you very much, Senator Dole. Senator Kassebaum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quite brief because there's been already much said, and I would just like to say why I believe Bob Gates will be a most successful chairman of the Central Intelligence Agency. There are two reasons. One, given the breadth of his experience in the intelligence community, and also with the work that he has done in relating the executive and legislative branches to the intelligence community, this will stand him in good stead in the obvious need to bring great intelligence, competence to the reorganization of the intelligence community. Much has been said here in opening statements about the drama of changing times, and it will mean changing the the intelligence community to fit the changing times, just as it will the defense community, the foreign aid community, and everything else as we adjust our leadership to these dramatic changes. Secondly, and I think perhaps in many ways most importantly, and Senator Dole touched on this, it's Bob Gates' relation to President Bush. President Bush has great confidence in Bob Gates. President Bush is a former director himself of the Central Intelligence Agency, and he knows what he expects in a director, and he has the highest confidence in Bob Gates. I think in the trade that's called a valuable asset, is it? And I certainly believe that indeed this is the most valuable asset. I have great confidence, and I know that this will be confirmed to us all as Bob Gates gets to be able to testify and make his own case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Kassebaum. Now call on the senior senator from Virginia, Senator Warner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll just follow on Senator Kassebaum's statement and saying by having that full confidence of the President, that gives you an enhanced statute as you deal with your counterparts throughout the world and other governments, because therein is one of the most fertile sources of intelligence collection. And to have that full confidence of the President enables you to sit at the round table in the White House and bring CIA and the other intelligence community in as a full partner in dealing with the Secretaries of State, Defense, Energy, and others who are constantly working on our security problem. That's invaluable. Mr. President, Mr. Chairman and others, as this world is faced with this proliferation of weapons of mass destruction which know no borders now, the ramparts of defense become really intelligence which can provide the early warning such that we can utilize to the extent possible whatever we have to deter and defend against those weapons. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, as I spoke earlier this morning, we, the United States, are being encircled by economic competition throughout the world. Unlike the sharing of intelligence on security and military matters, we have no friends and no sharing in this area. And we need a man who does have the confidence of the President, who does have the experience, who understands now as we reorganize the Central Intelligence Agency to shift those assets once devoted to the Soviet Union to the extent we can to quickly pick up, and I emphasize quickly, the capabilities needed to defend this country in economic security. Our economic security is just as important as our military security. And for that reason, the President chose a man who needs no on-the-job training and can pick up that job tomorrow and do it.
Thank you very much, Senator Warner. Pleasure also to welcome to the committee Senator Robb of Virginia, who also joining in introducing the nominee today. Senator Robb, we're happy to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Murkowski, other members of the committee. Introducing Bob Gates to the Intelligence Committee is probably as unnecessary as any particular act that could be done, but as a representative of his adopted state, I'm pleased to join, at least informally, presenting him with my senior colleague and our two colleagues from Kansas. We take great pride in the fact that the Central Intelligence Agency headquarters and many of those who serve professionally in that organization are in Virginia. I count it as a near neighbor. As a matter of fact, almost 20 years ago when we were completing our current house, we lived literally on the wire of the perimeter security for the Central Intelligence Agency. I would also note that Mr. Gates had the good fortune of spending some of his most important and formative years in higher education in one of the very fine institutions of higher learning in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the College of William and Mary. Judging from the opening statements, it is clear that Mr. Chairman, that you and the other members of the Intelligence Committee are going to conduct a very thorough investigation, and I think given the sensitivity of the post and the secrecy under which it must operate for most of its existence, that this is entirely appropriate. I look forward to the completion of that process, and I hope very much that Mr. Gates will be able to respond to those important questions that are raised in a way that will enable all of us to vote for him to confirm as Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. But I'm very pleased to join my colleagues at this time in presenting for formal confirmation process Mr. Robert Gates.
Thank you very much, Senator Robb and Senator Dole and your colleagues. Let me indicate to you, Senator Dole and others, as you've said in your statements, your hope is that our process will be thorough, that it will be fair, and then it will render a decision, as is in the obligation of this committee to render upon conclusion of hearing all the evidence. That's exactly the way we intend to conduct ourselves, and we appreciate you and other colleagues being here to present the nominee to us. Senator Rudman has joined us, but he's indicated to me waive his opening statement. We'll put your opening statement in the record. Any additional remark you'd like to make?
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I was delayed at a matter in the state this morning, and I am informed that the opening statements are so thorough and so brilliant that there's nothing constructive that I could add, so I will waive it.
Yeah, I would vouch for that.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure that the nominee and others present will appreciate that. Some have suggested that perhaps the most challenging job of any nominee and the most daunting task is to be able to have the perseverance to sit through the opening statements of the member of the committee, and we've put Mr. Gates to that task today. We now will turn to the opening comments of our nominee, and again, Mr. Gates, let me welcome you back to this committee. This has already been indicated. We have a long relationship between the members of this committee and you and the various capacities in which you serve the national security responsibilities of this country.
Yeah.
I would ask that you stand at this time and be sworn before you present testimony for the committee. Would you please raise your right hand? You, Robert M. Gates, solemnly swear that the testimony that you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Gates, we would welcome your opening comments at this time. I would ask that before you begin, if we might ask those from the news media to please clear the well before the nominee begins his statement. Mr. Gates, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it is a great honor to appear here before you as President Bush's nominee to be Director of Central Intelligence. I want to thank him for his confidence in me and for the honor of this nomination. I am humbled by it. I welcome these confirmation hearings to address the many issues that I know you will raise. Mr. Chairman, here at the outset, I want to thank you and the committee for the fair and professional treatment of my nomination. I also want to thank Senators Dole, Kassebaum, Robb, and Warner for their kind introductions. I have been in public service for 25 years. I arrived in Washington 25 years ago this summer with everything I owned in the back of a 1965 Mustang and no money. The Mustang is long gone, sold before it became a collector's item, and I still have no money. But I am enriched by a wonderful and patient wife and 2 great kids. I believe I still have the idealism that I brought with me from Kansas a quarter century ago, a deep conviction in the greatness of this country, in the uniqueness and wonder of its Constitution, and in its mission as a force for good in the world. My decision to commit my life to national service springs from these beliefs. I also have still the values that I brought with me from Kansas: family, hard work, candor and truthfulness, integrity, obeying the law, and a basic optimism about life. During these 25 years, I have worked for 6 presidents, Republicans and Democrats alike. I served 4 of them in the National Security Council. I've served 8 directors of the CIA. I've worked closely and harmoniously with this committee and its House of Representatives counterpart for more than 10 years as CIA's Deputy Director for Intelligence, Chairman of the National Intelligence Council, Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, Acting Director of Central Intelligence, and Deputy National Security Advisor. I have appeared before this committee more than 50 times during that period. So we are not strangers to one another. In short, I do not come before this committee as a new face, but rather as a nominee with a long track record. I anticipate that the committee will want to examine both that record, as well as my view of the future course of CIA and U.S. intelligence. I think all of the opening statements point to that. The committees appropriately have been looking at the future of U.S. intelligence, its structure and mission, in the aftermath of the Cold War, and now most recently after the revolution in the Soviet Union. Who would have thought that just 5 years ago we would stand where we are today? Certainly not the intelligence analysts sitting before you. Talk about humbling experiences. The old verities that have guided this country's national security policy for 45 years, and thus its intelligence service, have disappeared in a historical instant. Communism is dead or dying. A number of long-standing regional conflicts are coming to an end. The Cold War is over. The Communist Party lies mortally wounded in the Soviet Union, wounded by its own hand, and the forces of real reform are at last ascendant in the Soviet Union. Still as ever, there are challenges, concerns, and risks. The collapse of the Soviet and Russian empire offers the promise of democracy and economic transformation. But it also contains the seeds of grave instability, chaos, and civil war in a country possessing nearly 30,000 nuclear warheads, the most powerful of which are still aimed at us. We cannot yet divert our attention from the Soviet Union, but clearly our priorities and our concerns have changed. Meanwhile, a growing number of nations have or are developing nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons together with the ballistic missile technologies to deliver them. Some of our allies in that long Cold War are now at times serious adversaries in that global marketplace. Political instability in the Third World spawns conflict, famine, and chaos, challenging us politically, economically, sometimes militarily, and always morally. International narcotics cartels not only feed growing global demand, but increasingly have the capability to buy governments and rule countries. Regional conflict and its terrorist stepchildren, as in the Middle East, remain a reality despite our best efforts. I have been deeply engaged in dealing with all of these problems. I have been by the President's side when we prevented a coup attempt in the Philippines, liberated Panama, defeated Iraq's aggression against Kuwait, saw the Berlin Wall go down and led the effort to unify Germany and NATO, fostered the Polish Roundtable Agreement, completed the CFE and START agreements, and played a role in the success of the democratic forces during the recent Soviet coup attempt. The President and the Congress know that just as some threats have diminished, other dangers remain or have altered shape, just as new challenges and problems have emerged. The death of Soviet communism has vastly diminished the danger of global war, but the world remains a very rough neighborhood. Our nation's leaders, at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, have no wish to walk these streets blindfolded. We approach the close of the most violent century in man's history. 2 world wars, a long and hostile peace punctuated by protracted and bloody regional wars, the destruction of ancient empires, and the defeat of 2 inhuman ideologies, communism and Nazism, have set in motion vast political, social, and economic forces long frozen by totalitarianism and its legacy. The path to a new and brighter day is finally apparent, but will require still American leadership, strength, and vision, the willingness to act against those who would prey on the weak, and skillful navigation around the many obstacles that can thwart progress or send newly free but fragile democracies hurtling back into the darkness. The role of intelligence is to help the President, his senior advisors, and the Congress understand and deal with these changing realities. The challenge then to CIA and to U.S. intelligence is to adapt to this changing world, not just in places like the Soviet Union and Europe, but to the very idea of change, the idea that for years to come, change and uncertainty will dominate international life, that the unthinkable and the not even thought about will be commonplace. For us in intelligence to adapt to such a changing world will require unprecedentedly close collaboration of the President and his advisors, the intelligence community, and the Congress. If confirmed, I look forward to a close partnership with this committee in this remarkably challenging and stimulating process. Normally, a nominee would be circumspect about specific ideas for change. However, my nomination comes at a time when this committee is deeply engaged in looking at the future of U.S. intelligence and has, as this morning's statements made apparent, considerable interest in my views about the future and what I would do if confirmed to help guide CIA and its sister agencies toward the 21st century. I believe Director Webster's emphasis on flexibility is central to being responsive in a time of radical change and unpredictability. What follows are my ideas on where we ought to go from here. First, this remarkable moment in history affords us a not-to-be-missed opportunity to reassess the role, mission, priorities, and structure of American intelligence in the aftermath of the Cold War. This should not be done off the cuff. If confirmed, I will recommend that the President launch, with the direct involvement of his most senior security advisors, a major effort to determine the intelligence needs of the United States for the next decade or more, to the year 2005. He should then, in my view, charge the DCI to identify what the intelligence community must do to meet those needs. The 2 intelligence committees should have the opportunity to participate even before these proposals come before the Congress. At a time of revolutionary change abroad and government-wide fiscal constraints at home, U.S. intelligence cannot remain fundamentally unaffected. Accordingly, we, the executive branch and the Congress, must reach agreement on mission and priorities. Once these are determined, we can then logically address structure and budget. Admiral Bob Inman, as Deputy DCI, managed a similar process for the intelligence buildup during the first half of the 1980s. It is time to follow up that effort with an even bolder, much more far-reaching effort. This effort ought to be completed by the end of the year, in time to influence the next budget cycle. There are other problems and innovations that must be addressed as we change to cope with a changing and different world. The intelligence budget should be considered by the President, his senior advisors, and the Congress within but independently of the defense budget. We must dramatically expand our clandestine human intelligence collection effort. At the same time, we must consider the implications for our covert action capabilities of a dramatic decline in Soviet aggressiveness and disruptive activities in the Third World. We must remedy the gap between 21st century collection systems and a 19th century system for informing policymakers. We publish too much intelligence of questionable relevance to policymakers. Less and better should be the rule. CIA's relationship to and support for the U.S. military must be improved. The process by which the information needs of policymakers are translated into intelligence requirements must be strengthened. The relationship between our national and tactical intelligence programs must be dramatically improved. Finally, the intelligence community and CIA, in particular, must build on the openness Director Webster has encouraged to develop better popular understanding and support for U.S. intelligence activities. President Kennedy once said that CIA successes remain a secret while its failures are trumpeted. However, things have gotten out of hand when the most outrageous allegations against the agency are taken seriously, when the honor and integrity of thousands of patriotic public servants are suspect merely by virtue of where they work. CIA and its people deserve better, but changing perceptions first requires greater openness by the agency. I can elaborate on these proposals I've just made and others that I have in mind, but my point is clear. CIA and U.S. intelligence must change and be seen to change or confront irrelevance and growing sentiment for their dismantlement. I look forward to tackling this challenge with you. Contrary to popular perceptions of an adversary relationship, Congress has long been a strong supporter of a vital and effective U.S. intelligence service. It was the Congressional Intelligence Committees that launched the rebuilding of U.S. intelligence capabilities in 1979, and their support helped sustain that rebuilding in following years. This congressional support, not surprisingly, is valued in the intelligence community. But the community also recognizes and values the role of Congress in making intelligence accountable and in assuring that it operates within the law and in a manner consistent with American values. Access to our assessments by Congress, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, moderates, helps assure our objectivity and independence. We know that many Americans are uneasy about CIA and U.S. intelligence activities. They understand the need for information, and even on occasion for covert action, but they are uncomfortable with secrecy. And therein lies the value of congressional oversight, the reassurance to Americans that the laws are being obeyed and that there is accountability. This then puts a special responsibility on intelligence agencies to be truthful, straightforward, candid, and forthcoming in dealings with Congress. For more than 10 years, I have had a strong and positive relationship with this committee. I understand and respect its role and that of its House counterpart as surrogates for both the rest of the Congress and the American people. Consequently, a relationship of trust and confidence between the intelligence community and the two intelligence committees is of vital interest. and importance. Accordingly, I commit to you that should I be confirmed, whatever differences may develop from time to time between the intelligence committees and the executive branch generally, or CIA in particular, I would resign rather than jeopardize that relationship of trust and confidence. Mr. Chairman, that completes my formally prepared statement. Because of the great interest that this committee has and the centrality of Iran-Contra to these proceedings, I wanted to add some additional personal thoughts on this subject at the end that I wrote down last night. I've just referred to a commitment about trust and confidence. I don't make that commitment lightly. It is a direct outgrowth of watching the constant crises, primarily over covert action, in CIA congressional relations between 1981 and 1986, culminating in Iran-Contra. I suspect few people have reflected more than I have on the Iran-Contra affair. What went wrong, why CIA played by rules not of its own making, and what might have been done to prevent or at least stop this tragic affair. CIA has already paid a fearful price and learned costly lessons. But today, I want to speak about the misjudgments that I made and the lessons I learned. First, in retrospect, I should have taken more seriously after the 1st of October 1986 the possibility of impropriety or even wrongdoing in the government, and pursued this possibility more aggressively. I should have pressed the issue of a possible diversion more strenuously with Director Casey and with Admiral Poindexter. I should have done more. Instead, I contented myself with taking the information I had received to Casey and Poindexter, as well as to CIA's General Counsel, and then did not follow up after returning from overseas. Second, I should have been more skeptical about what I was told. I should have asked more questions, and I should have been less satisfied with the answers I received, especially from Director Casey. Third, I should have pressed harder for reversing the provision in the January finding prohibiting informing the Congress. At the same time, I believe that the actions I did take were well-intentioned and honest. While differences naturally exist in recalling the details of conversations and meetings at a remove or distance of months or sometimes even years, the record is clear that I opposed the Iran initiative, I urged notification of Congress, I acted to ensure CIA's compliance with the law, and when for the first time problems were brought to me, I informed Director Casey, consulted CIA's General Counsel, and followed the Council's recommendations. Even before the Iran initiative became public, I urged full public disclosure. After it became public, I pressed for full disclosure to the Congress. I ensured full CIA cooperation with multiple investigations, and I began trying to rebuild that relationship of trust and confidence between CIA and the Congress. Clearly, if I could relive October 1986, perhaps part of November, I would do certain things differently, and I believe better. And indeed, my actions as acting director for more than 5 months, and as Director Webster's deputy for nearly 2 years, demonstrate that I learned the lessons of Iran-Contra. During that period, from December 15, 1986, to the spring of 1989, there was not a single crisis of confidence between CIA and the Congress, in stark contrast to the preceding 6 years. nor will there be such a crisis under my stewardship if I am confirmed. You will not find a nominee for Director of Central Intelligence more aware of and sensitive to the lessons of that time, or more understanding of the importance of a good faith relationship with the Congress. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gates, for your opening comments to the committee and the very candid way in which you have shared your thoughts on some very sensitive issues which the committee will confront. It's my plan now to have the committee stand in recess until 2 o'clock. We will resume at that time and begin the questioning by members of the committee in the order of seniority throughout the balance of the afternoon. We'll stand in recess until 2 o'clock.
Mr. Chairman, could you give us a brief outline on how you envision time-wise the hearings going? For example, today we start, I think you said, what, at 2, and would go and roughly until what time?
I would think that we will try to go until about 6 o'clock tonight, because our hope is that we can finish the questioning. The Vice Chairman and I will have some institutional questions that will need to be asked. We will then go to members of the committee in order for approximately half an hour each. Then at the end of that process, there'll undoubtedly be some more members of the committee that would like to have additional time to ask questions. So I would like to be able to complete the questioning of the nominee by the members of the committee by close of business tomorrow. So it would be my plan to go until about 6 tonight. We'll see how our progress is, and that will determine how long we would go tomorrow.
And start tomorrow at what, 9:30?
9:30 in the morning as well.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if you could make available as soon as possible a transcript of these most significant remarks made by the nominee here in his closing statement. It could well be that they could guide us in our questioning, and I respect and commend the nominee for his statement.
Senator from Virginia, I would say that we will. I noted the nominee was reading from notes, obviously, that he's prepared just handwritten notes very, very recently, and I'm sure he'd make those available to us to make a transcript so that we can release the full text of those remarks.
How late does the chair expect to go tomorrow evening?
It's hard to predict. I would like to go tomorrow until we complete the questioning of the nominee by members of the committee, because we do anticipate, of course, because of Yom Kippur, we will not be in session on Wednesday. On Thursday, we do plan to start with our other witnesses, Mr. Fires, Mr. McMahon, Admiral Inman, and others that will be testifying on Thursday. So we will push ahead to try to complete the questioning of the nominee, obviously, either on request of the members of the committee or the nominee himself. There will be another opportunity to have questions addressed by the nominee later in the process after we've heard the outside witnesses as well.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to point out that I'm certain that several of us on the committee will take longer than a half hour for questions.
I understand that, and we'll obviously continue to go back to a second round, and as I've told the Senator from Ohio, as long as there are questions that members of this committee sincerely feel need to be addressed, that they wish to put to the nominee, they're certainly going to have that opportunity. But that's the reason I do want to leave open the possibility that we might go somewhat longer, depending on our progress today. We might go well into the evening tomorrow if it becomes necessary.
I want to point out to the senator that that is a holiday for some members of this committee.
Well, if
the holiday starts tomorrow evening, most of us will probably leave the area of the Senate around 5 o'clock, I would guess.
I'd be happy if there are problems. I would be happy to work with the senator to arrange the time of his questioning so we can make sure that he has every opportunity to ask any question that he wants to ask. Thank you very much. We'll stand in recess until 2 o'clock.
That concludes this Monday morning session of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. As the panel began its hearings on the nomination of Robert Gates to be the new Director of Central Intelligence. We will continue with the Monday afternoon session of the hearing in about 30 minutes. During the afternoon portion, senators entered into a question and answer session with Mr. Gates. But first, we will take this opportunity to get some perspective on intelligence gathering from Mr. David Whipple, Executive Director of the Association of Former Intelligence Officers. Mr. Whipple, who spent 35 years in the intelligence community, spoke with us recently about the history, responsibilities, and role of the CIA and other intelligence agencies.